إعلان مهم.
重要提示
Important announcement.
Message important.
Важное объявление.
Anuncio importante.
يرجى من المتحدثين الكرام إلقاء بياناتهم بسرعة معقولة لضمان ترجمة فورية وافية وعالية الجودة.
为了帮助口译准确完整传递发言信息，请代表发言时语速不要过快。
Speakers are kindly reminded to deliver their statements at a reasonable pace to ensure complete and quality interpretation.
Il est rappelé aux orateurs qu'ils doivent présenter leur déclaration à un rythme raisonnable afin de garantir une interprétation complète et de qualité.
Напоминаем ораторам, что для того, чтобы устный перевод был полным и качественным, необходимо выступать в умеренном темпе.
Se ruega a los oradores que pronuncien sus declaraciones a un ritmo razonable para garantizar una interpretación íntegra y de calidad.
Excellences, distingués participants, je déclare ouverte la 31e réunion de la 60e session du Conseil des droits de l'homme. Nous allons à présent procéder à la considération du document.
Thank you. Good morning. I call to order the 31st meeting of the 60th session, and we will now move to the consideration of the outcome document of Grenada on the basis of the report of the working group of the UPR on Grenada and its addendum. These documents, as well as the information to be presented by the delegation of Grenada, will constitute the outcome document of the review and will be adopted by a standard decision of the Council. I now have the honour to give the floor to Ms. Roxy McLeish Hutchinson, Permanent Secretary for Foreign Affairs within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Export Development of Grenada, to present additional information on the review. You have the floor.
Thank you, Vice President. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, good morning. It is an honor to share with you today on the occasion of the adoption of Grenada's report under the 4th cycle of the Universal Periodic Review. At the outset, allow me to extend Grenada's sincere appreciation to the members of the Troika and to the delegations who actively engaged with us and provided thoughtful recommendations during our review. Your constructive engagement underscores the international community's solidarity and its shared commitment to advancing the promotion and protection of human rights worldwide, including in small island developing states such as ours, which face unique vulnerabilities. During this cycle, Grenada received 171 recommendations. Following careful consideration and national consultations facilitated through our National Mechanism for Implementation, reporting, and follow-up, the government of Grenada has fully accepted 103 recommendations. These accepted recommendations enjoy the government's full support and will serve as a framework for our continuing efforts to strengthen human rights protections at the national level. The consultations were inclusive and participatory, involving government ministries, civil society organizations, faith-based groups, and the Office of the Ombudsman. This process reinforced national ownership of the UPR and ensured that the recommendations carry broad legitimacy. It is important to emphasize that even those recommendations not yet accepted remain on our national agenda. They will require further dialogue and consensus building at the domestic level before final decisions are taken. Mr. Vice President, Grenada has already begun implementing several of the recommendations we've accepted, focusing on areas of urgent national priority. Human rights and climate change. Grenada recognizes that climate change is not only an environmental challenge, but also a human rights issue, threatening the right to life, health, housing, and livelihoods of our people. Grenada's updated National Adaptation Plan is a bold, people-centered roadmap to climate resilience, led by our National Climate Change Committee and supported by the NAP Global Network through the International Institute for Sustainable Development. It harnesses improved data collection, stronger institutions, and inclusive engagement to protect coastlines, secure food, water, and energy systems, and safeguard health, education, and livelihood. The plan integrates gender and child-responsive approaches, adopts a human security lens, and addresses loss and damage, while aligning with the nationally determined contributions and sectoral adaptation plans. We extend sincere appreciation to the government of Germany for its generous support in advancing this work. As Grenada enters 2025 to 2030 implementation phase of the NAP will rally community voices, youth, gender advocates, and technical partners to mobilize the financing and collaboration needed to build a resilient, inclusive future for all Grenadians. Protection of vulnerable groups. Draft legislation is being finalized to strengthen protections for persons with disabilities and to fulfill Grenada's obligations under the Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. The bill will require accessibility audits and the adoption of universal design standards for public buildings and transport, mandate reasonable accommodation across public services, and establish clear timelines and enforcement mechanism. It will expand inclusive education through teacher training, curriculum adaptation, and provision of assistive technologies and learning support services. To boost economic inclusion, the legislation introduces measures to promote employment, vocational training, incentives for inclusive hiring, anti-discrimination safeguards, and strengthen workplace accommodation. This bill also proposes a dedicated oversight mechanism and monitoring framework backed by a targeted budget and capacity building for local authorities. It calls for sustained consultation and partnership with disability organizations to ensure implementation is effective, rights-based, and responsive to the needs of persons with disabilities. Advancing gender equality. Grenada continues to advance gender equality through both legislative reform and international cooperation. Cabinet has recently approved the development of draft legislation on gender-responsive care, which includes extended maternity leave, the introduction of parental leave, child benefits for low-income families, and enhanced protections for domestic and care workers. These reforms are firmly aligned with Grenada's commitment under the Convention of the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women and the Beijing Platform for Action. In parallel, Grenada is working diligently with the Commonwealth Secretariat through its office here in Geneva to finalize a national CEDAW report, further strengthening our international reporting obligations. This collaborative process has enabled us to assess the recent policy initiatives, identify gaps, and reaffirm our commitment to transparency, accountability, and the full realization of women's rights in accordance with international law. Correctional reform. The issue of prison overcrowding and the need for enhanced rehabilitation services have been the subject of multiple recommendations, each underscoring the urgent necessity for structural reform and improved inmate outcomes. In response, the government has accepted these recommendations and have recently completed the design for a new correctional facility that will allow for both the reconstruction and expansion of the existing infrastructure. This modern facility, estimated to cost US $50 million to construct and outfit, is envisioned as a transformative space that prioritizes human conditions guided by the Nelson Mandela rules, rehabilitation, and reintegration. Grenada therefore makes a sincere appeal at this forum for strategic partnership support, financial, technical, and programmatic, in helping to realize this national critical objective, which stands to benefit not only the incarcerated population, but the society at large. National Human Rights Institution. Mr. Vice President, Grenada is renewing efforts to establish a national human rights institution, working with partners such as the Commonwealth Secretariat through its Small States Office here in Geneva, to identify a model that fits our national context and fully complies with the Paris Principles. This initiative builds on earlier actions taken by government, including acceptance of Universal Periodic Review recommendations to create an NHRI, regional dialogues, and a two-day national consultation convened with the Commonwealth in June of 2016. Establishing an NHRI will directly advance our SDG commitments by strengthening institutions, promoting the rule of law, and access to justice for all, enhancing transparency and public access to information, improving inclusive participatory decision-making, and supporting the adoption of non-discriminatory laws and policies. We seek strategic partnership to realize an NHRI that will anchor durable human rights protection and accelerate progress towards our SDG benchmarks. Mr. Vice President, even among the recommendations not yet fully accepted, Grenada is taking concrete steps forward. The Status of Children Bill will eliminate discrimination based on birth status, ensuring equal rights for all children. The Marriage Amendment Bill raises the legal age of marriage to 18, protecting children from early and forced marriage in line with the Convention on the Rights of the Child. The Civil Legal Responsibility Bill seeks to amend the Age of Civil Legal Responsibility Act to vest minors aged 16 and over with the full legal capacity to consent independently to sexual and reproductive health treatments, including diagnostic procedures. The bill frames sexual and reproductive health treatment broadly to include medical, surgical, counseling, contraceptive, and diagnostic services related to reproductive well-being. The change would lower the age of civil consent from 18 to 16 for specific health matters, bringing civil consent on these health issues into closer alignment with the Criminal Code's age of sexual consent, 16. The bill was scheduled for parliamentary debate in July 2025 and has prompted public and political discussion. The main opposition signaled it would not support immediate passage without wider stakeholder consultation, citing the need for broader public engagement. That engagement is now ongoing. These amendments follow legal and policy reviews, including Spotlight Initiative-related assessments aimed at reducing family violence and improving access to services, and are presented as measures to improve minors' access to timely sexual and reproductive health care. These measures reflect Grenada's determination to continue progressing in the fulfillment of human rights obligations, even beyond the set of recommended formally accepted. Mr. Vice President, Grenada values the UPR as a unique mechanism of constructive dialogue, cooperation, and peer learning. With support of our NMIRF, we are determined to implement the accepted recommendations in a coordinated and systematic way, ensuring sustained improvements in the protection of the rights of our people. Grenada reaffirms our commitment to working with the Human Rights Council, UN treaty bodies, and our international partners to ensure that the principles of dignity, equality, and justice remain at the heart of Grenada's national development. In closing, Grenada reiterates its sincere gratitude to our partners, including the Human Rights Unit of the Commonwealth Secretariat, for supporting us throughout the UPR process, and particularly the Commonwealth Small States Office for providing invaluable logistical support to states like ours without a permanent presence in Geneva. We also thank our bilateral and multilateral partners whose technical and financial assistance has greatly strengthened Grenada's engagement with the UPR process. With their continued support, Grenada is confident in making tangible and lasting progress in advancing human rights commitments. Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I will now give the floor to the member states and observer states for their comments on the outcome document. The speaking time is 1 minute 30 seconds for all states. And with that, I call on the distinguished representative of Vietnam.
Le Vietnam.
Vietnam, please.
Ils sont pas là. Je passe au...
Vietnam is not in the room. Bahamas, please.
Vice President, the Bahamas congratulates Grenada, a fellow CARICOM state, on its constructive engagement in the fourth cycle of the Universal Periodic Review. We note that Grenada received 171 recommendations and accepted 103 of them, including the 3 recommendations made by the Bahamas. These called for the full implementation of the Adolescent Health Policy and the National Disability Policy and Strategic Action Plan, the expansion of climate-resilient infrastructure and disaster preparedness in vulnerable communities, and continued engagement with the OHCHR and other partners in the area of technical assistance and capacity building. We commend Grenada's leadership in pioneering the use of hurricane clauses in its sovereign bonds and integrating climate resilience into national budgeting, innovative tools which are vital for SIDS navigating the compound risks of climate change and external shocks. We also welcome Grenada's engagement with the OHCHR Regional Office for the Caribbean Community to strengthen national reporting and follow-up and encourage continued collaboration to this end. The Bahamas wishes Grenada every success in implementing its accepted recommendations and calls on the international community to provide the necessary support as the country seeks to advance its human rights and development priorities. I thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I call on Chile.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Vice President. We welcome the delegation of Grenada and welcome its acceptance of the recommendation from our country on creating a national human rights institution in line with the Paris Principles. Its establishment, we are convinced, will help to consolidate the institutional framework and strengthen the promotion and protection of fundamental human rights in the country. We encourage Grenada to continue making progress on the rights of women and children and ensuring that all persons can live free of discrimination and violation. Through international cooperation and exchange of good practice, we believe that Grenada can make sustained progress on the implementation of the recommendations accepted, and we wish it every success in implementing the commitments undertaken during this fourth cycle. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I call on China.
Mr. Vice President, the Chinese delegation commends Grenada for its achievements in the promotion and protection of human rights. Grenada has established a National Human Rights Coordinating Committee, adopted the National Policy and Strategic Action Plan on Disability, enacted the Domestic Violence Act, expanded civil society participation, and taken concrete measures to safeguard the right to education and economic and social rights of its people. China appreciates its acceptance of our recommendations and wishes the country greater success in the promotion and protection of human rights. China supports the Council's adoption of Grenada's UPR outcomes. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Merci.
Thank you. I call on Cuba.
Señor Vicepresidente.
Thank you, Vice President. Cuba welcomes the delegation of Grenada and commends its commitments to the UPR mechanism. We welcome the progress that it has made in promoting and protecting the human rights of its people, and in particular, the institutional strengthening, social institution, protection of children and empowerment of women. We recognize the legislative progress on education and processes to protect the well-being of the most vulnerable people. We note the efforts underway to implement the recommendations accepted and reiterate our support to the adoption of the report by consensus. Thank you.
Merci. Je passe la parole.
Thank you. I call on Dominic.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Dominica warmly welcomes the distinguished delegation of Grenada, a fellow OECS and CARICOM member state, to the adoption of their UPR outcome, and commends Grenada for its constructive engagement throughout the UPR process. We note that out of the 171 recommendations received during its review, Grenada has pledged to support 103, including recommendations which seek to advance climate resilience, address the intersection of climate change and human rights, reinforce social protection frameworks, and foster inclusive and sustainable development. As a fellow small island developing state confronted with multifaceted challenges that threaten development gains and the enjoyment of human rights, we acknowledge and laud Grenada's continued commitment and ongoing efforts to advance the promotion and protection of human rights in the face of these adversities. Dominica therefore supports the adoption of the UPR outcome of Grenada and extends best wishes in its implementation of the accepted recommendations. I thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I call on the Dominican Republic. Thank you, Vice President. My country congratulates Grenada on the constructive dialogue under the UPR and recognizes its openness to recommendations to promote and protect human rights. In particular, we point to the acceptance of our recommendations to ensure greater protection of the rights of children through increase in the minimum age for marriage to 18 years without any exceptions, in line with international standards. We also welcome the efforts to strengthen preschool education, ensuring at least 1 year free of charge and mandatory attendance of education up to the age of 18 as a measure for equity and early development. We emphasize the importance of a human rights-based approach in political matters, particularly as regards protection of the most vulnerable populations in order to ensure their resilience and well-being. We recommend adoption of the report by consensus. Thank you.
Merci. Je passe la parole.
Thank you. I call on El Salvador. Thank you, Vice President. We welcome the delegation of Grenada and thank it for the information provided. We congratulate Grenada on undergoing its 4th UPR and on the measures for social inclusion, education, and promotion of women and children's rights. We recognize in particular the initiatives to strengthen the institutional framework and cooperation with international human rights mechanisms, as well as the will expressed to continue consolidating public policies for human development. We wish Grenada every success in implementing the recommendations accepted and fully support the adoption of the report. Thank you.
Merci. Je passe la parole.
Thank you. I call on India.
Mr. Vice President, India warmly welcomes the delegation of Grenada for the adoption of the report of the working group on its fourth cycle of the Universal Periodic Review held on 30th April 2025. The review saw substantive and constructive participation, with 59 delegations taking the floor and making a total of 171 recommendations. We appreciate the constructive engagement of the delegation of Grenada during the entire review, which reflects the strong commitment they attach to the UPR process. We appreciate that as many as 103 recommendations have been accepted by Grenada, including 2 recommendations made by us. By recommending the adoption of their UPR report, we congratulate the delegation of Grenada on a successful review and wish them success in their efforts for implementing the accepted recommendations. I thank you.
Merci. Je passe.
Thank you. I call on Jamaica.
Thank you, Chair. My delegation warmly welcomes the delegation of Grenada, or CARICOM sister, back to Geneva for the consideration and adoption of the outcome of its UPR. We commend the government of Grenada for its continued commitment to the promotion and protection of human rights, as reflected in the acceptance of 103 recommendations during this review cycle. We particularly note Grenada's positive engagement with recommendations concerning the ratification of key international instruments, including the UNESCO Convention Against Discrimination in Education and the International Convention on the Protection of the Rights of All Migrant Workers and Members of their Families. We also take this opportunity to encourage the targeted operationalization of Jamaica's recommendation contained at 131.25, which calls for the strategic exploration of technical assistance and capacity building opportunities. This is especially important in addressing the challenges posed by limited resources and the increasingly devastating impact of extreme weather events. In closing, my delegation extends its best wishes for the successful adoption of Grenada's UPR outcome and congratulates the delegation for its constructive and cooperative engagement with the Human Rights Council. Thank you, Chair.
Merci.
Thank you. I call on the Maldives.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. The Maldives warmly welcomes the distinguished delegation from Grenada to the adoption of the UPR report and compliments Grenada's commitment to the UPR process. We commend the government of Grenada for accepting majority of the recommendations, including a recommendation made by the Maldives during the UPR working group session in May. We wish the government of Grenada success in the implementation of the accepted recommendations and request the Council to adopt the UPR outcome report of Grenada by consensus. Thank you, Mr. President.
Merci.
Thank you. I call on Morocco.
Mr. President, the delegation of the Kingdom of Morocco wishes to thank Grenada for its constructive engagement throughout the Universal Periodic Review process. Morocco welcomes Grenada's cooperative spirit and its commitment to the promotion and protection of human rights. We are pleased that Grenada accepted the recommendation made by my delegation to consider ratifying the International Convention on the Protection of the Rights of All Migrant Workers and Members of their Families. This reflects a positive step towards strengthening the legal framework toward the protection of migrants in accordance with universal human rights principles. Morocco expressed its support for Grenada's ongoing efforts to combat discrimination in key areas and encourages further action to ensure equal access for all. The Kingdom of Morocco extends its best wishes to the Grenadian delegation for the successful implementation of the accepted recommendations. Thank you.
Merci. Je passe la parole.
Thank you. I call on Nepal.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Nepal warmly welcomes the delegation of Grenada to the adoption of its Universal Periodic Review outcome and commends its constructive engagements throughout the process. We thank Grenada for accepting all the 4 recommendations offered by Nepal, reflecting its commitment to advancing human rights. Nepal acknowledges Grenada's efforts towards establishing a national human rights institution in line with the Paris Principles. We support the adoption of UPR outcome report by consensus and wish Grenada all success in implementing the accepted recommendation. I thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you. I call on Vietnam.
Mr. Vice President, Vietnam commends the Grenada delegation for its constructive and cooperative participation in the fourth cycle of the Universal Periodic Review. We reiterate the appreciation for the efforts Grenada has taken in promotion and protection on human rights despite the challenges posed by the climate change and the COVID-19 pandemic. We recognize the progress made by Grenada in strengthening its social protection system, promoting gender equality, expanding access to education, and enhancing public health initiatives. We appreciate Grenada for accepting both recommendations on accelerating the implementation of the special education needs policy, enhance national efforts on climate resilience, and strengthen technical and vocational training programs for youth, especially in digital skill and green jobs aligned with sustainable development. Mr. Vice President, Vietnam recommends the Council to adopt a Grenada UPR outcome by consensus and wishes Grenada success in implementation of all accepted recommendations. I thank you.
Merci.
Thank you very much. I give the floor to the delegation of the Philippines.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. The Philippines warmly welcomes the distinguished delegation of Grenada to the adoption of the outcome of its fourth Universal Periodic Review cycle. We thank Grenada for accepting the three recommendations presented by the Philippines relating to 1. Implementation of human rights education and training for law enforcement and the judiciary, particularly on the rights of women and children. 2. Alignment of its laws and policies on child trafficking and the sexual exploitation of children with international standards. And 3. Strengthening of measures to combat gender-based violence against women and children, particularly by instituting criminal penalties, improving access to justice, and ensuring the speedy resolution of cases. Mr. Vice President, my delegation recommends the adoption by consensus of the UPR Working Group report on Grenada by the Council. In closing, the Philippines wishes Grenada success in the implementation of accepted recommendations. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I give the floor to the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Vice President. The Russian delegation notes Grenada's passage through the fourth cycle of the UPR with satisfaction and thanks Grenada for the information on the recommendations, which including acceptance of most of those, including Russia's. We note that the country is following sustainable development, seeking to improve living standards and providing support to residents of poor regions and free medical care, as well as broadening access to free quality education. We commend the programs to combat discrimination, violence against women, to protect children from exploitation, and the development of legislation on freedom of information and protection of personal data. Russia recommends adopting the report on Grenada's fourth UPR. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I give the floor to Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Trinidad and Tobago warmly welcomes the delegation of Grenada, a fellow CARICOM member state, to the adoption of their UPR outcome. We congratulate Grenada on its constructive engagement throughout this fourth cycle and appreciate the updates provided today. We note that Grenada has accepted 103 of 171 recommendations received during its review, including 2 recommendations made by Trinidad and Tobago. This attests to Grenada's continued willingness and commitment to pursue the promotion and protection of human rights in the country, despite evident challenges and constraints faced as a small island developing state. Bearing these challenges in mind, Trinidad and Tobago commends efforts being made by Grenada to, inter alia, bolster climate resilience and adaptation, strengthen its national coordination and reporting mechanism, and pursue technical assistance and capacity building opportunities in pertinent areas. In this regard, Trinidad and Tobago supports the adoption of Grenada's UPR outcome and wishes Grenada every success in its implementation of the accepted recommendations arising from this fourth review. I thank you.
Merci. Je passe la...
Thank you. I give the floor to UN Women.
Thank you, Chair. UN Women commends Grenada's efforts to enhance women's economic security through increasing the minimum wage, including in female-dominated sectors. We welcome the recent cabinet decision supporting the development of legislation to strengthen gender-responsive care systems, efforts to collect data on unpaid care and domestic work, and to advance gender equality within the national budget. We remain concerned about the high prevalence of violence against women and girls, exacerbated by gaps within the available protection and response mechanisms. We encourage the government to strengthen laws and policies aimed at eliminating gender-based violence and gender-based discrimination. This includes amending and extending the National Gender Equality Policy and Action Plan to incorporate comprehensive sections on violence against women and girls and climate change and disaster risk resilience. UN Women is committed to providing technical support in the following areas. 1, advancing the development of legislation to address gender equal caring responsibilities, enhance parental leave, and provide child benefits for low-income families, and safeguard the rights of domestic and care workers. 2, developing a cost analysis to estimate the cost of universal access to care for children, persons with disabilities, and the elderly. 3, strengthening the disaster risk resilience and climate change recovery capacity of businesses and communities, including those in Carriacou and Petite Martinique. I thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I give the floor now to UN Habitat.
UN Habitat welcomes Grenada's emphasis on access to adequate housing, and in particular its consideration of the renovation and improvement of housing in addition to new construction. We further welcome the efforts to develop social housing programs and congratulate the government for making adequate housing for the victims of gender-based violence a priority. Grenada's holistic approach to its housing system, considering private sector and public-private construction as complementary to its social housing efforts. While noting Grenada's reservations on recommendations 45 and 161 relating to non-discrimination, including housing, we urge the government to ensure that housing and basic services are provided on an equitable basis and leave no one behind. UN Habitat congratulates Grenada on its water, sanitation and hygiene program and encourages the government to support the further development of effective and accountable water operating institutions with clear universal service objectives. UN Habitat welcomes Grenada's acceptance of multiple recommendations on gender equality, and in particular the recommendation to continue with reforms to ensure equal inheritance and property rights for common law and customary spouses. Equal housing, land and property rights, both in law and in practice, are essential to protecting and fulfilling the rights of women and girls in a wide range of areas and require clear and consistent long-term support at all levels of government. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. Give the floor to the delegation of Venezuela. Thank you, Vice President. We welcome the delegation of Grenada and we thank them for the presentation. We commend their cooperation with the Universal Periodic Review Mechanism. We believe that it is voluntary mechanisms rather than those which are imposed, which bring about best results in terms of promotion and protection of human rights. We note with satisfaction the acceptance of 3 recommendations presented by Venezuela during the interactive dialogue, focusing on continuing with national programs to protect the rights of the most vulnerable groups, including children, adolescents, older persons, and persons with disabilities, the promotion of technical assistance and capacity building to address climate change-related challenges, and the revision of domestic legislation to ensure the promotion, protection, and enjoyment of human rights, including the right to development. We encourage the state to continue with efforts to ensure full enjoyment of all human rights of their population based on the recommendations accepted during this cycle of the UPR. Thus, we recommend the adoption of the report. Thank you very much, sir.
Merci. C'était.
Thank you. That was the last speaker on my list. I remind you that all statements, including those that were not delivered, must be uploaded. I now give the floor to other stakeholders for their observations on the outcome document of the review. The speaking time is 2 minutes for all. The first speaker is Advocates for Human Rights by video.
And Greater Caribbean for Life are members of the World Coalition Against the Death Penalty.
We express our dismay that Grenada noted all 20 recommendations it received in the interactive dialogue pertaining to the death penalty, offering no explanation. We urge authorities to clarify whether they are complying with the Privy Council's ruling that no person may be held on death row for more than 5 years. In the third cycle UPR, Grenada made a voluntary pledge to engage the public in a dialogue regarding abolition of the death penalty. It did not honor that pledge. And again, during the interactive dialogue this May, Grenada stated that it recognized the significance of the issue of the death penalty and the need for inclusive national dialogue. Again, authorities have taken no action toward initiating such a dialogue. We are concerned that Grenada's voluntary pledges and statements during the interactive dialogue are mere lip service. We are alarmed, for example, that Grenada inexplicably noted Panama's recommendation to launch, in collaboration with civil society organizations, a program to engage the public and legislators in a dialogue on the abolition of the death penalty, particularly in light of Grenada's representations during the interactive dialogue in May that it would initiate such a dialogue. We urge Grenada to act swiftly in collaboration with civil society to honor its intention, as stated during the interactive dialogue, to initiate public consultations on the potential abolition of the death penalty. Such discussions among lawmakers and the general public about human rights concerns regarding the death penalty and the availability of effective alternative punishments will help establish a strong foundation for Grenada's progress toward abolition of the death penalty. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I give the floor to the Center for Global Non-Killing.
Dear human beings, Monsieur le Vice-Président,
Vice President.
the Earth, and of Grenada, Excellencies, everyone, everywhere, your delegation and authorities of Grenada, welcome to Geneva. If I feel safe, I will be very happy to visit Grenada. Yet, if I were in a low mental condition, if I missed my suicide, I would not want to see a legal trial and punishment added to my burden. Please, Grenada, update the criminal code, decriminalize suicide, and bring suicide prevention and healing in line with mental health standards. This is life-saving. If I was involved in a criminal prosecution, innocent or not, until OP2 of CCPR is ratified, I could end up on death row. Please, Grenada, immediately end the possibility of death penalty. This is non-killing. If I was killed in a riot or a similar situation, unless it is changed, the Constitution of Grenada would talk about the killer, not the victim. States have a duty to protect life and prevent death. Dear people and authorities of Grenada, it is time to take your Constitution in your hands and to celebrate life therein. This is the purpose of a Constitution, to lead people to a safe, shared, and universally happy life. This is life. Finally, we congratulate the government of Grenada for accepting for the first time a recommendation to ratify the Genocide Convention. May this ratification happen very soon. Protecting against genocide is recognizing the right of everyone to an identity, and giving the right to life to everyone is giving humanity an identity. This is universal life. Hoping to visit Grenada, the Greens and Spicy Islands very soon. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, sir.
Merci.
Thank you. That was the last speaker on the list. Before I give the floor to the delegation of Grenada for their final remarks, allow me to note that according to the information received, of the 171 recommendations received, 103 enjoy the support of Grenada and 68 were noted. I now return the floor to the delegation for their concluding remarks. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President, and thank you to all delegations for your constructive dialogue this morning. On a point of clarity, Grenada would like to re-emphasize that in my earlier presentation, I have indicated government's position that not all of the recommendations that are we have not yet accepted remain on our national agenda. The death penalty is one such recommendation. And currently, among the persons incarcerated at our prison, no one has been sentenced to death. And that has been the case in Grenada for about 20 years. Mr. Vice President, Grenada reaffirms its unwavering commitment to the universal principles of the human rights, the rule of law, and the inherent dignity of every person, and pledges to translate the Human Rights Council recommendation into concrete, time-bound reforms and programs that strengthen our institutions, protect the most vulnerable, promote justice, equality, and inclusive development. We extend our gratitude to all of our partners, bilateral and multilateral partners, for their sustained technical and financial support, which has been indispensable to our progress. We thank also UN Women for their pledge of continued technical support to assist us in the implementation of some of our recommendations. We respectfully call for continued strategic partnerships, technical, financial, and programmatic, from our international partners, regional bodies, civil society, and the private sector to support effective implementation, capacity building, and monitoring by combining national resolve with targeted external support. Grenada will accelerate towards a rights-based future where every Grenadian can live with dignity, opportunity, and security. Together, we can turn promise into protection. Let our shared values and our shared resolve become the safeguard that guarantees the dignity, justice, and opportunity for every Grenadian. I thank you, Mr. President, and I thank you to all delegations.
Je remercie.
My thanks to the delegation for their presentation and for their constructive participation and the participation of Grenada all throughout the process of the UPR. I now propose that the Council adopt the decision on the outcome document of the UPR of Grenada as on the screen. I see no objections. The decision is adopted. We will now briefly suspend our meeting before moving to consideration of the outcome document of Turkey.
Merci.
Thank you.
Excellences, distingués participants, nous allons maintenant.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, participants, we're now going to proceed to consideration of the outcome document of Turkey, based on the report of the Working Group on the Universal Periodic Review of Turkey and its addendum. These documents, together with the information which will now be presented by the delegation of Turkey, constitute the outcome document of the review and will be adopted by a standard decision of the Council. It is now my pleasure to give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Burak Akkapar, Ambassador Permanent Representative of Turkey to the United Nations Office at Geneva, for him to present some additional information on that review. Excellency, allow me to give you the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Let me begin by expressing our appreciation to the Troika, Côte d'Ivoire, France, and Japan, and to the Secretariat for their dedicated efforts throughout this process. I also extend sincere thanks to all delegations who engaged in Turkey's fourth UPR with a constructive spirit. In line with the importance we attach to efficiency and rationalization in this Council's work, I will keep my remarks concise. It's an honor to address this distinguished Council on the outcome of Turkey's UPR. From the outset, allow me to reaffirm Turkey's unwavering commitment to the UPR mechanism. We view it as a unique and comprehensive peer review platform that contributes significantly to the strengthening of human rights standards worldwide and advancing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Turkey's strong engagement was evident in May when our high-level delegation took part in the review. During this cycle, Turkey received 334 recommendations. 6 were rejected as they ran counter to the UPR's non-confrontational spirit. We made this position clear in the working group report. The remaining 328 recommendations were carefully reviewed by all relevant authorities, including our national human rights institutions. I'm very pleased and honored to report that Turkey supports 252 of these recommendations, a high rate of 76.8%. Many are already under implementation. The remaining 76 were noted for various reasons. Some combined several issues and could not be endorsed as a whole. Others fell outside our current reform agenda. And some contained inaccurate information or assumptions about our laws and practices. A detailed account of our position is provided in the addendum to the Working Group's report of August 15, 2025. Turkey's support rate speaks for itself. It reflects both our commitment to the UPR process and our determination to advance human rights in all their dimensions. This commitment is all the more significant given the extraordinary challenges we have faced in recent years. Wars and conflicts in our neighborhood, unprecedented migration flows, the scourge of terrorism, and the most devastating natural disaster of this century have all tested our resilience. Yet, despite these pressures, Turkey has pursued reforms in line with its human-centered governance approach. Notably, we successfully concluded the third judicial reform strategy and the Human Rights Action Plan. Building on these, President Erdogan launched the fourth judicial reform strategy 2025-2028 on January 23rd this year. Its aim is twofold: to consolidate past reforms and to respond to new needs, ensuring a justice system firmly anchored in the rule of law and respect for human rights. Beyond judicial reform, Turkey has adopted and implemented action plans on women's empowerment, the rights of the child, persons with disabilities, and older persons. These initiatives share a common purpose: to strengthen equality, enable effective participation in all areas of life, and expand access to employment, education, and public services, while reinforcing protective and preventive measures for those in vulnerable situations. Promotion and protection of human rights and the advancement of Turkish democracy to a higher level remain at the top of our national agenda. In this spirit, work has already begun on a new human rights action plan. Mr. Vice President, Turkey's record demonstrates a consistent and deliberate effort to raise the bar on human rights, the rule of law, and democratic governance, even in the face of adversity, with wars and fragility right beyond our borders. Our resolve remains firm, and the UPR recommendations we have supported will guide our reforms while helping us move closer to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I now give the floor to member states and observer states for their comments on the outcome review document. The speaking time is 1 minute 30 seconds for all states. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Venezuela. Thank you, sir. We welcome the distinguished delegation of Turkey, and we thank them for their valuable presentation. We commend the country on its broad cooperation with the Universal Periodic Review mechanism. We believe that it is voluntary mechanisms and not those which are imposed, which create best results in the promotion and protection of human rights. We hail the acceptance of the 3 recommendations presented by the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela during the interactive dialogue, focusing on the promotion and protection of human rights of women, children, and adolescents, including the strengthening of their role and position in society, the implementation of the strategy document and plan of action on child rights 2023 to 2028, and the creation of specialized judicial mechanisms such as juvenile justice centers and judicial interview rooms which are adapted to the needs of minors. We highlight the progress demonstrated by the country when it comes to promotion, protection, and enjoyment of human rights, including the right to development, bearing in mind the political will of the state to guarantee civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights with no distinction. Thus, we recommend the adoption of the report. Thank you very much, sir.
Merci. La parole.
Thank you. I give the floor to Vietnam.
So, Vice President, Vietnam warmly welcomes the delegation of Turkey for the adoption of the report of the working group on its 4th cycle of the Universal Periodic Review. The review saw substantive and constructive participation, with 125 delegations taking the floor and making a total of 334 recommendations. We appreciate the constructive engagement of the delegation of Turkey during the entire review, which reflects the strong commitment they attach to the UPR process. We appreciate that Turkey has accepted both recommendations made by Vietnam on continuing to improve health infrastructure and services in earthquake-affected rural and remote areas to ensure universal access, and further strengthening efforts to ensure the effective implementation of laws and policy to protect and promote the rights of women. While recommending the adoption of the UPR report, we congratulate the delegation of Turkey on a successful review and wish them success in their efforts for implementing the accepted recommendations. I thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Merci.
Thank you. Yemen has the floor.
شكرا السيد نائب الرئيس.
Thank you, Vice President. We welcome to this council the delegation of the Sister Republic of Turkey, and we commend them on the positive spirit which has characterized this dialogue. We thank the Troika and the Secretariat for their efforts. We thank Turkey for its efforts to promote human rights, particularly the judicial reform strategy, the national plan of action to ensure women's empowerment, protect children's rights, the rights of persons with disabilities and older persons. We also we are pleased with the welcome that Turkey gives to millions of refugees by providing them with basic services, taking a cost-sharing approach and responsibility-sharing approach at the international level. We are persuaded that the Sister Republic of Turkey will continue to pursue implementation of the recommendations received with a view to promoting fundamental rights and freedoms for all citizens and residents on soil. We, in conclusion, recommend to the Council that it adopt Turkey's report by consensus. We express our strong support to Turkey as it seeks to promote human rights at national and international level. Thank you. I give the floor to Albania, says the Vice President.
Monsieur le Vice-Président,
Vice President, Albania commends Turkey and its ongoing commitment to the UPR process. Albania commends Turkey for having accepted a large number of recommendations seeking to further promote and protect human rights in the country. We have the pleasure of recommending to the government of Turkey recognizing that the government has accepted 3 recommendations of Albania, seeking to pursue efforts to align its legal framework with international standards, also to pursue efforts for greater representativity of women in political and economic life of the country, and to adopt comprehensive legislation to combat all forms of discrimination. On the basis of the recommendations accepted, we are convinced that Turkey will continue to bring about further improvements, particularly to its legislative and institutional framework on human rights. In conclusion, Albania recommends to the Council that it adopt the UPR report of Turkey by consensus. Thank you, sir.
Merci. L'Azerbaïdjan à la...
Thank you. I call on Azerbaijan.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. We extend our congratulations to Turkey on the successful review and commend the steps taken by the government of Turkey to further promote and protect human rights. We appreciate Turkey's strong commitment to enhancing the effectiveness of the judiciary, improving access to and the administration of justice, and reinforcing the independence and impartiality of the judicial system. In this regard, we commend Turkey's firm stance to protect and promote human rights and its continued efforts aimed at further compliance with international principles and standards, both in law and practice. We also commend Turkey for providing comprehensive written information on the recommendations it received. We particularly note with appreciation that a number of the supported recommendations have already been implemented or are currently in the process of implementation. In conclusion, we hope that the Council will adopt UPR outcome report of Turkey by consensus and wish the government of Turkey every success in the implementation of the supported recommendations from the 4th cycle. Thank you.
Merci, le Bahrain.
Thank you. I call on Bahrain.
شكرا السيد نائب الرئيس يسعدني أن أرحب.
Thank you, Vice President. We welcome the friendly Republic of Turkey and commend the efforts undertaken to prepare the national report. We welcome the acceptance of the recommendations made during the review of Turkey in a constructive spirit. President, this review was an excellent opportunity to review the efforts made by Turkey to fulfill its human rights obligations and future plans and strategies. We note Turkey's interest in promoting and protecting human rights. Within the framework of acceptance of UPR recommendations, in view of this, we recommend to the Human Rights Council the adoption of the UPR report of Turkey and wish it for success.
Bangladesh.
Thank you. I call on Bangladesh.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, Bangladesh warmly welcomes the distinguished delegation of Turkey for the adoption of the UPR Working Group's report on its 4th UPR held on 6 May 2025. The review saw substantive and constructive participation with 125 delegations taking the floor and making a total of 334 recommendations. We appreciate the constructive engagement of the delegation of Turkey during the entire review process, reflecting their unwavering commitment to the UPR process. Bangladesh appreciates that Turkey has accepted all 4 recommendations made by our delegation. Bangladesh recommends the adoption of Turkey's UPR report by consensus. Finally, our delegation congratulates the delegation of Turkey on its successful review and wish them success in their efforts towards implementing the accepted recommendations. I thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I call on Belarus. Thank you, Vice President. We welcome delegation of Turkey and note its significant efforts in preparing and presenting the report, which reflects the progress in human rights in the country. Turkey has supported all three of Belarus's recommendations on protecting the rights of women and children and combating irregular migration and human trafficking. We wish Turkey every success in implementing the accepted recommendations and in further improvement of the national legal and institutional framework for human rights. Thank you.
Merci. Je passe la parole.
Thank you. I call on Belgium.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Belgium welcomes the positive engagement of Turkey during its UPR. My delegation is pleased to note that its recommendation has been accepted to take concrete legislative and policy measures to prevent and combat gender-based violence, criminalizing domestic violence and femicide, and ensuring effective investigation, prosecution, and victim protection. In its response, Turkey mentions that the recommendation is already being implemented. Belgium would appreciate information on the measures that have already been taken to implement these recommendations and which further measures are being envisaged. We regret, however, that the government of Turkey noted our recommendation related to freedom of assembly and the restrictions on peaceful gatherings, particularly those of LGBTQI+ persons and associations, as well as our recommendation to amend counter-terrorism and related legislation to ensure compliance with international human rights standards. The second consecutive ban on LGBTQI+ Pride Parade in June 2025, the blanket 3-day ban on meetings and demonstrations issued by the Istanbul governor in September 2025, or the various terrorism trials, including the so-called Girls Trial, show that this is indeed an issue of concern. We respectfully invite the authorities of Turkey to reconsider their position. Thank you.
Merci. La parole.
Thank you. I call on Bolivia.
Gracias.
Thank you, Vice President. We welcome delegation to Turkey and thank it for the additional information provided in the various documents. We note the acceptance of all of the recommendations made by our country. We welcome the fact that Turkey already has a broad anti-discrimination and anti-hate crime legal framework. We note the constructive dialogue that took place under the fourth cycle of the review and the work done by the Troika, Côte d'Ivoire, France, and Japan. We wish Turkey every success in implementing the accepted recommendations and support the adoption of the report by consensus. Thank you.
Merci. La parole est...
Thank you. I call on Botswana.
The delegation of Turkey to the adoption of their UPR outcome. Our delegation notes with appreciation Turkey's efforts to promote and protect human rights, both at national and international levels. The acceptance of a significant number of recommendations, including those offered by Botswana during their review, is a clear demonstration of commitment to the UPR process. Finally, Botswana supports the adoption of Turkey's UPR outcome. We wish Turkey success in the implementation of accepted recommendations. I thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Merci.
Thank you. I call on Brunei Darussalam.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Brunei Darussalam thanks the delegation of Turkey for the positive updates provided today regarding the advancements made since its review. We are pleased to note that Turkey has accepted 252 of the more than 300 recommendations it received, including the two proposed by Brunei Darussalam on improving the education system and on further promoting the empowerment of women. In this regard, we recommend the adoption of the UPR Working Group report and wish Turkey every success in the implementation of the accepted recommendations. I thank you.
Merci. Je passe la...
Thank you. I call on Burkina Faso.
Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Vice President. My delegation warmly welcomes that of Turkey and thanks it for the additional information provided to the Council. We welcome the acceptance by Turkey of the majority of the recommendations made during the review, including the two from my country. We note with satisfaction the efforts made to protect and promote human rights, and we encourage continuation of this. We call for the adaptation of the report on Turkey by consensus and wish the delegation every success in implementing the recommendations. Thank you. Thank you. I call on Cambodia.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. My delegation warmly welcomes the distinguished delegation of Turkey to the adoption of the UPR outcome. We commend Turkey for its constructive engagement with the UPR process and for the spirit of openness and cooperation it has demonstrated throughout the review. We also welcome the progress made in advancing the protection of human rights, including efforts to strengthen the rule of law, promote gender equality, and enhance the protection of vulnerable groups. Including Cambodia joins with other delegations in recommending the adoption of the UPR outcomes for the Republic of Turkey and wishes for the success of the implementation of the accepted recommendations. I thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Merci. Je passe.
Thank you. I call on Cameroon. Thank you, Vice President. Cameroon welcomes the delegation of Turkey and thanks it for presenting its final report and the additional information. We commend Turkey's adhesion, its support of a large majority of the 344 recommendations made, including all of those made by my country following the 49th session of the Working Group on the UPR of 9th May 2025. We call for adoption of the final document on the UPR of Turkey in order to support that state's ongoing efforts to promote and protect human rights. In conclusion, Cameroon wishes Turkey every success in implementing the recommendations. I accept it. Thank you.
Si je passe la parole.
Thank you. I call on Chad.
Merci, Monsieur le
Thank you, President. Chad welcomes the delegation of Turkey and thanks it for the additional information provided to the Council. We welcome the adoption of the acceptance of the recommendations made by our country and the efforts since the third cycle of the UPR with the adoption of a series of legislative and administrative measures to strengthen the judiciary and access to justice, and also support the independence of the judiciary in line with the separation of powers. We take this opportunity to encourage Turkey to pursue its efforts to improve on an ongoing basis the promotion and protection of human rights. We call for adoption of the report by consensus and wish Turkey effective implementation of the recommendations. Thank you.
Merci. Je passe la parole.
Thank you. I call on China.
Mr. Vice President, the Chinese delegation commends Turkey for its achievements in the promotion and protection of human rights. In particular, its implementation of the Human Rights Action Plan and the adoption of a series of legislative and administrative measures to strengthen judicial independence, as well as strategies to safeguard the rights of women, children, persons with disabilities, and the elderly person, and to promote their equal participation. China appreciates Turkey's acceptance of the recommendations of China, and we wish Turkey even greater success in promoting and protecting human rights. China supports the Human Rights Council's adoption of Turkey's UPR outcome report. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Merci. Le Congo a la.
Thank you. I call on Congo. Thank you, Vice President. My country warmly welcomes the delegation of Turkey and thanks it for presenting additional information to the Human Rights Council. We welcome Turkey's acceptance of the majority of the recommendations made, including that of my country on the subject of combating trafficking in persons. We commend Turkey's efforts to build on progress made in promotion and protection of human rights and its ongoing cooperation with United Nations mechanisms. Congo wishes Turkey every success in implementing the various recommendations accepted and call on members of the Council to adopt the final report by consensus. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. That was the last speaker that we could accommodate. Allow me to remind you that all statements, including those that could not be delivered because of time constraints, should be uploaded. I will now call on the other stakeholders for their comments on the report. The speaking time is 2 minutes for all, and I call on the Movement Against Racism and for Friendship Among Peoples by video statement.
Of Turkey, several states called on the country under review to take measures to better respect the minorities' rights, who are subject to discrimination and even persecution by the Turkish authorities. We denounce the judicial harassment of Pınar Selek, a sociologist, feminist, and human rights defender who is about to appear in court for the 7th time on trumped-up charges that have been contradicted by Turkish forensic police. We recall that hundreds of activists, lawyers, human rights defenders, political leaders, and elected representatives of the Kurdish minority are victims of arbitrary detention, and we denounce the arbitrary arrests of Kurdish mayors who are replaced by civil servants. MREC calls on the Turkish authorities to seize the opportunity offered by the leader of the Kurdistan Workers' Party, Abdullah Öcalan, to engage in a process of pacification and inclusion that will promote economic development and social peace in Turkey. I thank you for your attention.
Merci. Je passe.
Thank you. I call on the World Evangelical Alliance for a joint statement.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. The World Evangelical Alliance and the Baptist World Alliance thank Turkey for its commitment to the UPR process. We are concerned by Turkey's narrow interpretation of minority. The Protestant community includes both citizens and non-citizens, yet many foreign members, some long-term residents with families, face entry bans under codes such as N82 and G87. These individuals have not been charged with any crime and are being banned from the country simply because of their religious affiliation. Their exclusion also disrupts local congregations, often leaving communities without a pastor. We urge the government to engage in structured dialogue with the Protestant minority and to include community representatives in official meetings. Experience shows that open communication helps resolve problems quickly and constructively. While Turkey has noted in its report its laws addressing hate speech, Christians experienced an increase in 2024 in hate speech and hate crimes. In many cases, despite formal complaints, perpetrators were released without consequences, fueling mistrust. We therefore encourage Turkey to strengthen its legislation by clearly defining hate speech and hate crimes in line with international standards, and to ensure that all complaints are effectively investigated and perpetrators held accountable. Thank you.
Merci. La parole.
Thank you. I call on Amnesty International video.
Mr. President, Amnesty International welcomes the end of the 8-year-long ordeal for Taner Kılıç, former chair of Amnesty International Turkey in February 2025, after his unjust conviction for membership of a terrorist organization was overturned. However, despite Turkey's support and note as already implemented on several recommendations regarding the protection of human rights defenders, the crackdown on civil society has intensified. 11 members of the Executive Board of the Istanbul Bar Association face criminal and civil proceedings in reprisal for their public statement calling for an effective investigation into the deaths of 2 journalists in northern Syria. They are being prosecuted for propaganda for a terrorist organization and publicly disseminating misleading information. We urge Turkey to end the misuse of civil and criminal measures against human rights defenders, lawyers, journalists, and others solely for exercising their rights to freedom of expression, association, and peaceful assembly, and to ensure they can carry out their activities without fear of reprisals, arrest, or abusive criminal or administrative proceedings. Turkey's support and note as already implemented for at least 11 recommendations on the protection of freedom of peaceful assembly contradicts the reality. Law enforcement officials used unlawful force, at times amounting to ill treatment, against those protesting the detention of Istanbul Mayor İmamoğlu in 2025. Indiscriminate use of less lethal weapons against peaceful protesters caused numerous injuries. Peaceful LGBTI pride marches faced blanket bans, unlawful use of force, and arbitrary detentions. We urge the authorities to ensure everyone can enjoy the right to freedom of peaceful assembly without discrimination and to promptly, effectively, and impartially investigate allegations of unlawful use of force, including violations of the absolute prohibition of torture and other ill treatment. Thank you.
Merci. Je passe la parole.
Thank you. I call on United Nations Watch.
Mr. Chair, Turkish President Erdogan just told the UN that human rights in the West have been eroded, and he blamed Israel. Now, distinguished delegates, in psychology, attributing one's own malicious acts to others is known as projection. Let us consider freedom of expression, freedom of the press. Under President Erdogan, human rights activists and journalists have been persecuted and locked up. We hosted here Turkish journalist Nurcan Baysal, and she testified, quote, "I received a 10-month prison sentence due to an article I wrote recording the war crimes by the Turkish military in the Kurdish town of Cizre, where nearly 150 people were burnt alive in the basements as they took shelter during the bombardment." Children's rights? The United States recently added Turkey to its list of countries implicated in the use of child soldiers. Its proxy, the Syria National Army, recruits children. Freedom of assembly and protest? In March, President Erdogan launched a violent crackdown on protests. Authorities imposed sweeping restrictions, blanket bans on gatherings.
Oui, de la délégation de Turquie.
Delegation of Turkey.
Mr. Vice President, we would like to recall that according to Human Rights Council Resolutions 5/1 and the President's letter of 1 November 2022, the Universal Periodic Review should be conducted in an objective, non-selective, non-confrontational, and non-politicized manner. The UPR is not the forum to address bilateral, political, or territorial issues which fall outside the mandate of the working group and this consent. We kindly request the Secretariat and you, Mr. Vice President, to ensure that all delegations fully respect these principles throughout the proceedings. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me kindly remind all speakers that it is important to contextualize intervention according to the theme and of each agenda item. We are currently discussing agenda item 6 of the Universal Periodic Universal. And for that, I want to remind the delegation to take care of that. We are not in a political discussion. Thank you. You can give.
Now we know what it's like in Turkey, exactly what they're trying to do to me here. They impose blanket bans on social media platforms, curbing access, preventing the dissemination of information, shutting down major public transportation in Istanbul in a systematic effort to suppress dissent and mobilizations. Democracy? Under Erdogan, this year, democracy in Turkey entered its most perilous phase. In March, after the mayor of Istanbul was reelected, he was thrown into prison just before he was about to be nominated to run for president on false, politically motivated charges. He has languished behind bars for 6 months. Across Turkey, more than a dozen mayors from the opposition are now imprisoned, silencing millions of voters in one of the world's in many of the world's great cities. Mr. Chairman, the true erosion of human rights is not in the West, but in President Erdogan's own house. It's time to end the hypocrisy.
Merci. Je passe.
I thank you, and I call on Ilga World by video.
Mr. President, this statement is delivered in consultation with Murat-Çekiç Human Rights Association, CAUSGL, and the May 17 Association. We thank the states that issued 19 recommendations to Turkey on the human rights of LGBTI+ persons. We reaffirm our commitment to closely monitor and report on the implementation of these recommendations, and we stand ready to collaborate with the states, the UN system, and national institutions to ensure progress in this regard. We welcome Turkey's support for recommendations 40.43 and 40.45. However, we are deeply concerned that Turkey continues to institutionalize discrimination by excluding transgender, non-binary, and intersex persons from its legal framework. Consequently, no recommendations advancing equal rights for LGBTI+ persons were supported. Turkey also declined to include sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, and sex characteristics in the penal code. As a result, crimes motivated by bias against LGBTI+ persons remain unrecognized and unpunished. Likewise, the National Human Rights Institution excludes LGBTI+ persons from accessing remedies. The absence of legislation protecting gender identity, gender expression, and sex characteristics perpetuates systematic discrimination against transgender and non-binary persons, particularly in access to justice, health, education, and employment. We further note with concern the government's restrictive interpretation of gender as solely biological sex. We therefore urge Turkey to engage in genuine dialogue and take concrete action in collaboration with civil society and international partners to promote, protect, and fulfill the human rights of all LGBTI+ persons. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I give the floor to Article 19 by video.
Article 19 and the Media and Law Studies Association welcome the opportunity to participate in the adoption of the UPR outcome of Turkey. In this fourth UPR cycle, Turkey supported several recommendations on the freedom of expression, asserting that many of the recommended measures are already implemented, and that journalists and human rights offenders continue to operate without fear of reprisals. Despite Turkey's expressed commitment to these recommendations, the freedom of expression continues to deteriorate in the country. Turkey claimed that steps have been taken to prevent the disproportionate use of its anti-terrorism legislation and its penal code provision criminalizing disseminating disinformation. In reality, these provisions remain overly broad and vague and continue to be wielded against critical voices. Data collected by the Media and Law Studies Association shows that 43% of criminal cases initiated against journalists between 2020 and 2023 were based on the anti-terror law. Similarly, at least 65 journalists have faced investigations for disseminating disinformation since its criminalization in 2022. Despite Turkey's reassurances, online censorship remains a serious concern. Over 30 different public institutions and bodies have been granted the authority to block or request blocking of online content, often through administrative orders without prior judicial authorization or meaningful judicial review. Social media platforms and messaging services are increasingly throttled during periods of social or political tension on administrative decisions by the presidency, with little explanation or oversight. Two recent examples include the throttling in Istanbul of X, TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, and Telegram for 42 hours in March, and for 21 hours in September, this time including WhatsApp and Signal. While we acknowledge Turkey's vocal support for its UPR recommendations on the freedom of expression, we underline that in order for these commitments to be truly effective, Turkey must step up its efforts to fully and genuinely implement the recommendations by reforming its repressive laws and practices. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to lawyers for a joint statement by video.
Mr. President, we welcome Turkey's support for some of the recommendations on judicial independence, the protection of human rights offenders, facilitating favorable conditions for lawyers and human rights offenders to carry out their legitimate professional duties. However, Turkey's assertion that these recommendations have already been implemented stands in stark contrast with reality. Structural reforms have weakened the separation of powers, allowing executive interference with the Council of Judges and Prosecutors. Judicial appointments and promotions remain subject to undue political influence. Bar associations face increasing politicization, with reforms distorting proportional representation within the Union of Turkish bars, thereby weakening critical voices. Interference with admissions disproportionately affects lawyers working on human rights or politically sensitive cases, undermining clients' rights to choose legal counsel. In addition, restrictions on lawyer-client confidentiality, denial of access to case files, and limitations on defense rights, particularly in terrorism-related cases, continue to undermine fair trial and due process guarantees, in violation of Article 14 of the ICCPR and the UN Basic Principles on the role of lawyers. We remain deeply concerned about the systematic targeting of lawyers performing their professional duties. Lawyers are frequently associated with their clients' causes, facing arbitrary arrests, criminal prosecution, and harassment. The ongoing criminal and civil proceedings against the Istanbul Bar Association's leadership for issuing statements within its professional mandate exemplify this pattern. The proceedings, which rely on overly broad anti-terrorism and disinformation laws, constitute a direct assault on the independence of the legal profession and generate a chilling effect that restricts access to justice for all. We urge Turkey to implement the recommendations pertaining to the rights of lawyers in practice, repeal vague anti-terrorism laws, guarantee due process and the right to an effective defense, and enable lawyers and bar associations to perform their duties freely, independently, and without fear of reprisal. Finally, we call on Turkey to promptly sign and ratify the Council of Europe Convention on the Profession of Lawyer and encourage it to submit a midterm report on progress toward implementation. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Civicus.
Mr. Vice President, Civicus welcomes Turkey's engagement in the UPR and its stated commitment to human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. We regret, however, that despite accepting 25 civic space-related recommendations in the previous cycle, Turkey continues to severely restrict fundamental freedoms. Many recommendations in this cycle were not accepted on the grounds that they had already been implemented, yet the situation on the ground shows the opposite. Repression of civic space and civil society in Turkey has intensified. The country was placed on the latest Civicus Monitor watch list amid the violent suppression of protests. In March, after Istanbul's mayor was jailed, nearly 2,000 people, including peaceful protesters, lawyers, and journalists, were detained and rushed through mass trials. In June, police brutally dispersed Istanbul Pride and Trans Pride, detaining 95 people and arresting 3, the first Pride-related arrests in Turkey's history. Recent protests against a court-appointed trustee for Istanbul branch of the Republican People's Party also faced protest bans, excessive force, arrests, and social media throttling. Freedom of expression remains severely restricted, with widespread censorship and blocking of websites and other online content. In 2024 alone, 36 journalists were convicted with sentences totaling nearly 100 years. Critical voices, including media, lawyers, protesters, human rights defenders, and social media users, face criminalization and detention under broad law on terrorists, spreading false information and insulting the president. We urge the government of Turkey to end these repressive practices and uphold its international human rights obligations. We thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Christian Solidarity Worldwide by video.
Thank you, Mr. President. CSW welcomes Turkey's participation in the UPR process. However, we regret the government merely noted Greece's recommendation for it to ensure freedom of religion, including by granting the Ecumenical Patriarchate legal personality, reopening the Halki Seminary, and allowing non-Muslim communities to elect their leadership and manage their foundations. Turkey's failure to honor promises to reopen the Halki Seminary implies continuing acquiescence with Islamist and nationalist voices that oppose this reopening. Said acquiescence has coincided with a significant deterioration in the situation of freedom of religion or belief. Alevi Muslims, Baha'is, and Christians, particularly those who have converted from Islam, including refugees and asylum seekers, face daily societal hostilities. Hate speech and occasional hate crimes targeting religious minorities continue, including attacks on places of worship and even murder in extreme cases, with perpetrators generally enjoying impunity. CSW calls on Turkey to respect, protect, and fulfill the provisions for freedom of religion or belief articulated in its national constitution for all religious communities. Freedom of expression is also under threat. While tentatively welcoming Turkey's decision to accept a number of recommendations to advance freedom of expression, we regret its decision to only note recommendations to release individuals in prison for exercising freedom of opinion and expression. On the 14th of June 2024, Diamond Tema, an agnostic and secularist content creator, relocated to Albania after receiving death threats for his part in a YouTube debate about Sharia law and warnings he would be arrested if he remained. During the discussion, Tema had called Prophet Muhammad's marriage and consummation of the marriage to his final wife Aisha immoral and incompatible with human rights. He had also criticized the ruling AK Party, the Republican People's Party, Good Party, and other opposition parties for allegedly Islamist leanings. On the 18th of June 2024, an arrest warrant was issued for Temel for violating Article 216 of the Turkish Criminal Code, which criminalizes publicly degrading the religious values of a section of the public. CSW calls on the government of Turkey to dismiss this charge and to review Article 216 and other provisions in the Criminal Code which foster discrimination against minorities and violations of the right to freedom of expression, aligning them with international standards. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Mahat for Peace, Development and Human Rights Association by video.
Thank you, Mr. President. MAC thanks Turkey for its constructive cooperation with the UPR and for its broad consultation with all government agencies regarding the recommendations presented to it during its first review. However, MAC has concerned that Turkey has not accepted the majority of recommendations related to accession to international human rights treaties and conventions and their protocols, including the one to ratify the International Convention for Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearance and the optional protocol to International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. MAT also has concerns about the arbitrary practice facing lawyers in Turkey. On June 19, 2025, Istanbul court authorized the detention of the lawyer of the mayor of Istanbul on grounds of substantiated charges. On the other hand, MAT notes the widespread phenomena of femicides amid the state's failure to provide protection for women. Reports reviewed by MAT documented the killing of 136 women during the first half of 2025, including women who have filed formal protection requests. However, 9 of these women were killed despite having received protection measures. Finally, MAT recommends that the Turkish government reconsider its position on acceding to international human rights conventions and their optional protocols. MAT also encourages the government to establish effective mechanisms for reporting violence against women. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you, Excellencies, distinguished participants. That was the last speaker that we could accommodate. Before I give the floor to the delegation of Turkey for concluding remarks, allow me to note that according to information provided, out of the 334 recommendations received, Turkey has supported 253 of them and noted 81. I now return the floor to His Excellency for concluding remarks. Thank you. The floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. This has been a useful exercise. This august forum drives its true value from remaining a genuine and non-politicized platform. Throughout this process, we have listened carefully to all interventions. We, of course, reject intervention made in an abusive tone, politicized and unfounded content. To those that were constructive and aligned with the spirit of the UPR, Turkey has responded in that same spirit. Turkey's steadfast commitment to human rights, democracy, and the rule of law is evident in the action plans we're developing, the reforms we have undertaken, and our very active engagement with international human rights mechanisms, including this very UPR. I have reported, and as you have underscored, Turkey supports 252 of these recommendations, a very high rate of 76.8%, and that many are already under implementation. We will continue to implement further reforms and address all issues related to human rights with commitment and determination. Work has already begun on a new human rights action plan. We thank all delegations who contributed with thoughtful and constructive comments, which have enriched the process and strengthened its outcomes. Finally, I wish to extend our gratitude to the interpreters, editors, and conference services staff, whose professional support has been indispensable in bringing this session to a successful conclusion. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Merci.
Thank you. My thanks once again to His Excellency the Ambassador for his presentation and for the constructive participation of Turkey throughout the UPR process. Excellencies, distinguished participant, I now propose that the Council adopt the decision pertaining to the outcome document of the Universal Periodic Review of Turkey as on the screen. I see no objection. The decision is adopted. We will now briefly suspend the meeting before moving to consideration of the outcome document of Guyana.
Excellencies,
distinguished participants, we will now proceed to consideration of the outcome document of Guyana. Based on the report of the Working Group on the Universal Periodic Review of Guyana and its addendum. These documents, as well as the information that will now be presented by the delegation of Guyana, constitute the outcome document of the review and will be adopted by a standard decision of this Council. It is now my pleasure to give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Bevan MacDonald, Ambassador and Deputy Permanent Representative of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana to the United Nations Office at Geneva, to introduce the delegation and remarks. Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Excellencies, distinguished members of the UPR Working Group, ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to introduce the delegation of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana. Our delegation is led by the Honorable Minister Gail Teixeira, Minister of Parliamentary Affairs and Governance. Minister Teixeira is accompanied by His Excellency Dr. Leslie Ramsamy, myself, Ms. Joanne Bond, Deputy Parliamentary Counsel, Ms. Alicia Jerome Rees, Mr. Anil Prasad, and Mr. Colin Lucky. Mr. President, the Honorable Minister Gail Teixeira will address the Council via pre-recorded statement, and I ask that the statement is played. Thank you.
Representatives of member states. Guyana is honored to participate in the 60th session of the Human Rights Council for the adoption of the outcome of its fourth Universal Periodic Review. We extend our sincere appreciation to the 70 member states that engaged constructively with our delegation during our review held on May the 6th, 2025. We also wish to acknowledge with gratitude the valuable support of the Troika, comprised of representatives of the Kingdom of Belgium, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the Dominican Republic. Further, we express our appreciation to the UPR Secretariat and Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights for their continued guidance and assistance throughout the UPR process. The UPR remains an invaluable mechanism for promoting transparency, mutual accountability, and constructive dialogue among member states. This process continues to serve as a crucial platform to assess member states' human rights records, engage meaningfully with their partners and stakeholders, and address challenges. The process allows state parties to reaffirm their continued commitment to safeguarding human rights and the dignity of all people. During Guyana's fourth review, the state received 206 recommendations covering a broad spectrum of human rights protections, including civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights, as well as measures to strengthen institutional and legislative frameworks. Following a series of comprehensive consultations with the cabinet, which includes the president, the prime minister, and all ministers of government, as well as engagements with the National Mechanism for Reporting and Follow-up and the Constitutional Rights Commissions, Guyana has accepted 146 recommendations. Of the other 60 recommendations formulated during the interactive dialogue, 58 has been noted. Two specific recommendations cited in paragraphs 103.16 and 103.52 were divided into two parts to accurately reflect the state's positions. In particular, recommendation on the ratification of the 1951 Convention relating to the status of refugees and the establishment of a legal framework to protect refugees was noted, while the recommendation on the development of comprehensive national legislation and policies on migration was supported. Similarly, the recommendation to abolish the death penalty definitively was noted, whereas the recommendation to explicitly criminalize torture in domestic legislation, along with the elimination of references to flogging, was supported. This method ensures that the state positions on these important matters are accurately and transparently reflected. Guyana has acceded to 8 of the 9 core UN human rights treaties, along with several optional protocols, reflecting our long-standing commitment to the international human rights system. We emphasize, however, that accession alone is not enough. Full implementation requires aligning domestic legislation with treaty provisions, strengthening institutional capacity, and ensuring adequate human, technical, and financial resources for effective monitoring and enforcement. The state will nevertheless continue to give due consideration to the recommendations on ratification of additional treaties in line with national priorities and capacities, while remaining steadfast in our commitment to promoting and protecting human rights. Guyana reiterates, as highlighted in its 4th National UPR report, that the Constitutional Reform Commission, established in 2024, will undertake a comprehensive review of the Constitution, including matters related to the protection of human rights. Accordingly, consensus on 25 of the noted recommendations, such as the possible abolition of the death penalty, the appointment of the Chancellor and Chief Justice of the Judiciary, amendments to the Constitution to prohibit discrimination on grounds of sexual orientation and gender identity, and the operationalization of the Human Rights Commission in accordance with the Paris Principles, will depend on the outcome of the constitutional reform process. Guyana's decision to note these recommendations must not be interpreted as a rejection of these recommendations, but an expression of respect for independence and democratic principles of the already initiated constitutional reform process, wherein the Guyanese populace will be included in the consultative process and have a say and determine the final amendments to the Guyana Constitution. This approach underscores Guyana's steadfast commitment to strengthening inclusive democratic governance and advancing the promotion and protection of human rights for all. The UPR process continues to complement and reinforce Guyana's national priorities, whilst also providing valuable guidance for future action. Notably, many of the recommendations Guyana supported were already being actively implemented at the time of the review. Nevertheless, as emphasized during the review process, the state remains committed to taking all necessary measures, including via the allocation of adequate resources, to ensure their full and sustained implementation over the reporting period. These include continuity in judicial, legal, and administrative reforms to further strengthen the administration of justice, implementing national policies to protect in the environment and advance climate justice initiatives, increasing investments in healthcare, education, housing, and social protection, with particular focus on Indigenous peoples, women, children, and persons with disabilities. strengthening the institutional capacities of the rights commissions, and enhancing the national mechanism for reporting and follow-up, and accelerating the digitalization of public administration and the judiciary, including the expansion of e-governance platforms and electronic systems. Post-review highlights. Since the review on May the 6th, 2025, Guyana continues to advance a range of measures aimed at strengthening the judiciary. Notably, on May the 21st, 2025, the Judicial Service Commission appointed an additional 7 new appellate judges to serve on Guyana's Court of Appeal, thereby strengthening the institutional framework underpinning the administration of justice. The Court of Appeal is now better resourced to fulfill its mandate of reviewing decisions and orders of the High Court, thereby ensuring that the law is applied consistently, efficiently, and with fairness. In doing so, the Court contributes meaningfully to the preservation of the rule of law and the protection of fundamental judicial rights. Guyana's role as a leading advocate for climate action and environmental stewardship continues to be exemplified by its recent initiative of establishing the Global Biodiversity Alliance and hosting the inaugural Global Biodiversity Alliance Summit in July 2025. This summit marked a historic milestone in global efforts to safeguard nature, combat climate change, and promote climate justice. The summit brought together representatives of over 140 countries and organizations, including indigenous leaders, civil society, scientists, youth, financial institutions, and the private sector. This landmark initiative establishes an inclusive platform to promote coordinated action, innovative financing, and knowledge exchange for the protection and restoration of biodiversity worldwide. It commits members to integrating biodiversity considerations into national climate and development strategies, expanding access to sustainable finance instruments, and empowering indigenous peoples and local communities as custodians of the environment, in keeping with Guyana's Low Carbon Development Strategy 2030. This summit demonstrates that a small developing state such as Guyana can help shape global climate agendas and drive transformative change. Guyana is the Secretariat of the GBA. As a new oil-producing country, Guyana in May 2025 enacted the Oil Pollution Prevention, Preparedness, Response and Responsibility Act, number 6 of 2025, establishing a national framework to prevent and manage oil spills. The law ensures rigorous risk assessments, coordinated emergency responses, and full corporate liability for cleanup, restoration, and damages. As Guyana's oil sector continues to expand, this legislation strengthens oversight, promotes industry accountability, and safeguards Guyana's marine and coastal ecosystems, thereby advancing the right to a healthy environment as enshrined in Article 149J of Guyana's Constitution. Also in June 2025, Guyana enacted the International Measures for the Protection of Children Hague Convention Act, number 13 of 2025, giving domestic effect to the Hague Convention on the civil aspects of international child abduction. This act further underscores Guyana's commitment to upholding international child protection standards and ensuring that the rights and welfare of children remain paramount in all judicial and administrative proceedings. Guyana's recently concluded general and regional elections held on September 1st, 2025 were conducted in free, fair, transparent, and peaceful manner, reflecting the growing strength of Guyana's democratic institutions and the active engagement of its citizens. The integrity of these elections was further reinforced by amendments to the Representation of the People Act of 2022, which strengthened electoral safeguards and increased voter confidence in the electoral process. The peaceful transitional period between the elections and the declaration results is a testimony of the maturation of Guyana's young democracy. These stand in stark contrast to the 2020 elections, which were marred by attempts to subvert the will of the people, with a delay of 5 months before the declarations of the results on August 2nd, 2020, during the COVID epidemic. President Mohamed Irfan Ali, elected for a second term, committed at his inauguration ceremony on September 7, 2025, to serve as a leader for all Guyanese and to build one Guyana rooted in unity, equity, and shared prosperity. He underscored that democracy is enriched by inclusion and strengthened through nation building. Amongst the foremost priorities outlined for the next 5 years is the launch of a national crusade against poverty, dismantling structural barriers, expanding affordable housing and financial inclusion, and supporting small businesses. Special emphasis will be placed on supporting women, youth, and the elderly. Childcare centers will be expanded and national response to domestic violence intensified. The non-contributory automatic old age pension will continue to increase and care facilities for the elderly will expand, while mobile health units will continue to be deployed to rural communities and free education at all levels is guaranteed. In terms of democratic governance, reforms are being implemented to strengthen integrity, transparency, and accountability in both the public and the private spheres. The administration of the public sector will be transformed into a more efficient, citizen-focused institution with digitalized government services being introduced to enhance transparency, effectiveness, and equitable distribution in the best interest of all Guyanese. In closing, Guyana recognizes the fourth UPR cycle provided an important opportunity for reflection, consolidation of progress, and renewed commitment to human rights. Guyana remains committed to the UPR process and reaffirms its dedication to implementing the accepted recommendations adopted in this cycle within available resources, strengthening the rule of law and protecting the rights and freedoms of all individuals within our territory. We look forward to continue our collaboration with the Human Rights Council, treaty bodies, special procedures, civil society, and development partners as we work to translate these commitments into tangible improvements in the lives of all of our people. Guyana remains aware of the challenges facing the world in ensuring full realization of human rights for all, especially in the context of exacerbating climate vulnerabilities, geographic disparities, resource constraints, and human rights reversals globally. Still, we reaffirm our commitment to working at the national level and in partnership with the international community, including through technical cooperation, to navigate these challenges, implement our UPR commitments, and advance a rights-based sustainable development agenda for all. Thank you.
Distingués représentants de...
I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Jamaica. Thank you, Mr. Vice President. The delegation of Jamaica commends the government of Guyana for the strategic and inclusive approach to the consideration of the 206 recommendations received during its UPR. We particularly welcome the high-level consultations involving the President, Prime Minister, and all ministers, which ensured a transparent and participatory process that carefully assessed the policy implications and resource requirements of each recommendation. This represents a commendable procedural best practice that other member states may wish to emulate in their own UPR processes. We further commend Guyana for its decision to support 146 recommendations during this review cycle, including Jamaica's recommendation at 103.20, calling for accession to the UNESCO Convention for the Safeguarding of the Intangible Cultural Heritage. In closing, my delegation extends its best wishes for the successful adoption of Guyana's UPR outcome. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I give the floor to Kuwait.
السيد نائب الرئيس يرحب وفد بلادي بوفد.
Thank you, Vice President. We welcome the delegation of Guyana and thank them for their presentation to the Council on the recommendations during the UPR. We commend them on having accepted various recommendations to protect human rights, in particular the two recommendations issued by Kuwait to pursue the adoption of measures to combat corruption with the support of UNHRC and to continue to strengthen democratic institutions, in particular those operating in the area of criminal justice. We wish the delegation every success in implementing the accepted recommendations, and we recommend to the Council that it adopt the outcome report. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I give the floor to the Maldives.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. The Maldives warmly welcomes the distinguished delegation from Guyana to the adoption of the UPR report and compliments Guyana's commitment to the UPR process. We commend the government of Guyana for accepting majority of the recommendations, including the two recommendations made by the Maldives during the UPR working group session in May. We wish the government of Guyana success in the implementation of the accepted recommendations and request the Council to adopt the UPR outcome report of Guyana by consensus. I thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I give the floor to Morocco.
Mr. President, my delegation commends Guyana's constructive participations in the Universal Periodic Review, which demonstrates its commitment to advancing the promotion and protection of human rights. We welcome Guyana's acceptance of the recommendation made by Morocco to strengthen access to healthcare services in rural and hinterland communities, including through the development of public hospitals and family planning services. Morocco supports the adoption of the Universal Periodic Review outcome of Guyana and wishes the country every success in implementing the recommendations it had endorsed. Thank you, Mr. President.
Merci. Le Népal.
Thank you. I call on Nepal.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Nepal warmly welcomes the delegation of Guyana to the adoption of the UPR outcome and thanks them for their constructive engagements with the human rights mechanisms. We thank Guyana for accepting 2 out of 3 recommendations that we offered. We appreciate the efforts of Guyana in addressing the challenges posed by climate change and its efforts towards transitioning to low-carbon economy. Nepal wishes Guyana all success in implementing the accepted recommendations and supports the adoption of UPR outcome report by consensus. I thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Merci. La parole.
Thank you. I call on the Philippines.
Mr. Vice President, the Philippines warmly welcomes the esteemed delegation of Guyana to the adoption of its 4th UPR cycle report. We thank Guyana for supporting our recommendations to, number 1, enhance anti-trafficking efforts, especially in rural areas, through capacity building for law enforcement officers on early identification, investigation, and prosecution of cases, and ensuring support and compensation to victims and survivors. 2, to further promote inclusive participation of the public in environmental decision-making, ensuring that marginalized communities have access to relevant data and a meaningful voice to shape policies that affect them. And 3, to continue to uphold the rights of women and children by amending its legislation to criminalize all forms of gender-based violence, including femicide. Mr. Vice President, the Philippines supports the Council's adoption of Guyana's UPR outcome by consensus and wishes Guyana success in the implementation of all accepted recommendations. I thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I call on Venezuela.
Gracias, Presidente.
Thank you, President. We welcome the delegation of Guyana and thank it for its presentation. We note its cooperation with the UPR mechanism. We believe that voluntary rather than imposed mechanisms provide the best results in promoting and protecting human rights. We note the acceptance of 3 out of the 4 recommendations made by Venezuela during the interactive dialogue on promotion and protection of human rights, including elimination of discriminatory practices against minority ethnic groups, and eradication of hate speech, the adoption of legislative measures to define and criminalize torture and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment. We regret that our recommendation on eliminating arbitrary detention was not accepted, particularly where it affects children, and ensuring unconditionally comprehensive reparation to victims. This cannot contribute to the human rights situation in the country. Furthermore, we urge Guyana to respect the spirit and purpose of the UPR mechanism in future presentations, avoiding references that distort the provisions contained in Resolution 5.1 of the Human Rights Council. Thank you, President.
Merci. Je passe la parole.
Thank you. I call on Singapore.
Mr. Vice President, Singapore congratulates the delegation of the Republic of Guyana on its 4th Universal Periodic Review. We commend Guyana for its engagement with the UPR process and its consideration of the various recommendations put forward by delegations. We thank Guyana for accepting both our recommendations. First, to continue its efforts to improve access to maternal and child healthcare services in all regions. Second, to continue to prioritize enhancing access to safe drinking water and sanitation for all. Singapore supports the adoption of the Working Group's report on Guyana's UPR. Thank you.
Merci. Le Soudan.
Thank you. I call on Sudan.
شكرا سيد نائب الرئيس. السودان يشيد بالتقدم المحرز.
Thank you, President. We welcome the progress made on promoting human rights in Guyana and commend its active participation in the UPR and in presenting the report and accepting the recommendations by certain countries, including my own. Allow me to strengthen the normative and institutional framework for human rights, pursuing national programs to implement the 2030 agenda and protection of the environment, addressing the harmful effects of climate change. We recommend adoption of the report and wish Guyana every success in implementing the recommendations.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Trinidad and Tobago warmly welcomes the delegation of Guyana, a fellow CARICOM member state, to the adoption of the Universal Periodic Review outcome, and congratulates Guyana for its constructive engagement throughout this 4th cycle UPR process. We also appreciate the updates provided today. We note that Guyana has pledged support for 146 of the 206 recommendations received during its review, including 2 recommendations made by Trinidad and Tobago. In this regard, we welcome this positive signal that Guyana remains resolute in its commitment to pursuing the promotion and protection of human rights in the country. In particular, Trinidad and Tobago commends Guyana for its commitment to strengthen measures aimed at, inter alia, enhancing the quality of healthcare, particularly maternal and child healthcare, building climate resilience, and bolstering child protection. We also highlight the continuing importance of technical cooperation and international collaboration in these efforts. Trinidad and Tobago supports the adoption of Guyana's UPR outcome and wishes Guyana every success in its implementation of the accepted recommendations arising from this 4th review. I thank you.
Merci. Je passe la...
Thank you. I call on UN Women.
Thank you, Chair. UN Women welcomes the progress made by Guyana to advance gender equality and women's rights, including through the adoption of the Family Violence Act of 2024 that enhances protections for victims of violence and a gender quota to increase women's political participation. We remain concerned about the high prevalence of violence against women and pervasive reports of violence against girls, particularly in underserved communities. We encourage Guyana to strengthen the implementation of the
Valoramos especialmente esta actitud, dado que tuvimos
clear will to make progress in promoting and protecting poverty reduction and reduction of territorial inequalities, strengthening inclusive education and rural areas, and stepping up environmental governance to prevent contamination by plastics and microplastics. In particular, we welcome the acceptance of two recommendations of great relevance: strengthening programs to eradicate violence against women and girls, and strengthening public policies for older persons. We believe that implementation of these measures will contribute to the comprehensive development of Guyana and the well-being of its people, and we recommend adoption of the report by consensus. Thank you.
Si je passe la parole à...
Thank you. I call on UN Habitat by video.
UN Habitat welcomes Guyana's national housing program and its targeting of both low and middle income families. The attention given to informal settlements, which provide for those most in need, is also welcome, and the government is encouraged to implement well-designed long-term solutions in accordance with international law and best practice. UN Habitat also welcomes Guyana's acceptance of recommendations related to the rights to water and sanitation for all, including for specific targeted programs, and its own commitments to groups such as indigenous communities and older persons. We encourage the development of effective water operators and their collaboration with others, such importance in coming years. UN Habitat congratulates Guyana on its progress towards gender equality, particularly in the country's governance. Concerns about domestic and sexual violence are noted, and we encourage the government to ensure that these are explicitly addressed within housing policies and administrative practice. Thank you.
Merci, je passe la...
Thank you. I call on UNICEF by video statement.
Mr. President, UNICEF commends the government of Guyana for its constructive engagement in the fourth cycle of the UPR. We welcome in particular the acceptance of several recommendations directly relevant to children's rights, including commitments to strengthen safeguards against gender-based violence, to continue efforts to prevent all forms of violence against children, and to guarantee that all children, regardless of legal or migration status, enjoy full access to education, health, and social services. UNICEF encourages the government to also give consideration to a number of recommendations still pending, notably those relating to raising the minimum age of marriage to 18 without exception, prohibiting corporal punishment in educational settings, adopting a national action plan to prevent and respond to gender-based violence, and ensuring effective access to safe water and sanitation for indigenous communities, including through strengthened infrastructure. Building on our strong history of partnership, UNICEF reaffirms its full commitment to work hand in hand with the government of Guyana to support the full realization of these recommendations and all obligations related to the rights, protection, and well-being of every child. Thank you.
Merci, je...
Thank you. I call on the Russian Federation. Thank you, Vice President. Russia welcomes Guyana's fourth UPR passage. We thank Guyana for providing information on the recommendations it received. It has accepted the majority, including all of the Russian ones, which shows its commitment to promoting and protecting human rights. We emphasize the responsible attitude to fulfilling obligations under the main international human rights treaties. And we welcome the measures to improve detention conditions, including for minors, and the prohibition of corporal punishment for them. We note the program to improve the rights of the indigenous population and provision of drinking water and electricity to rural areas, as well as education and health. We recommend adoption of the report on Guyana's fourth UPR. Thank you.
Merci. La parole est au...
Thank you. I call on Vietnam.
Mr. Vice President, Vietnam commends the constructive engagement of the government of Guyana in this fourth UPR review cycle and its careful consideration of the various recommendations put forward by delegations. We appreciate Guyana's acceptance of all three recommendations made by Vietnam on accelerating the digitalization of public administration and judiciary, strengthening inclusive urban and housing development policies, and expanding access to legal identity and civil registration services. Once again, Vietnam commended Guyana for its achievements in strengthening democratic governance, economic transformation, and equitable access to essential services. We also appreciated the continued investments by Guyanans in legal reforms, inclusive infrastructure, and the modernization of the public sector. Finally, Vietnam recommends the adoption of the fourth UPR report of Guyana and wishes the government of Guyana success in its implementation. I thank you.
Merci. La parole est aux Bahamas.
Thank you. I call on the Bahamas.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. The Bahamas congratulates Guyana, a fellow CARICOM state, on its active and constructive participation in the fourth cycle of the Universal Periodic Review. We note that Guyana received 206 recommendations and accepted 146 of them, including the 3 recommendations made by the Bahamas. These related to expanding support services for survivors of gender-based violence, improving digital connectivity and educational access in hinterland and remote communities, and strengthening infrastructure resilience and disaster preparedness, particularly in areas exposed to climate risks. We commend Guyana's institutional progress through the establishment of the National Mechanism for Implementation, Reporting, and Follow-up, and its legislative advancements, including the passage of the Family Violence Act and the Combating Trafficking in Persons Act. As fellow small states vulnerable to climate change, we particularly welcome Guyana's pioneering steps in climate transparency, including the submission of its biennial transparency report under the Paris Agreement and the issuance of carbon credits under the TREES framework, which supports indigenous communities. The Bahamas encourages Guyana to continue its engagement with international and regional partners in implementing its accepted recommendations and reaffirms its solidarity as Guyana endeavors to uphold its human rights commitments. I thank you.
Merci. La parole.
Thank you. I call on Chile. Thank you, Vice President. Chile welcomes the delegation of Guyana and thanks it for the constructive spirit in the dialogue in this fourth cycle. We commend Guyana's acceptation of 4 of the 6 recommendations for our country, including on prohibiting cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment, harmonizing national legislation with international standards on the issue of torture, adopting comprehensive legislation against gender-based violence, and decriminalizing consenting same-sex relations. We believe that this will lead to tangible improvements in people's lives. We also urge Guyana to continue considering joining the Inter-American Convention on Human Rights. We believe that this would further strengthen the national legislative framework and provide greater safeguards. Chile stands ready to cooperate bilaterally and multilaterally to support Guyana in implementing its commitments. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you, Excellencies, distinguished delegates. That was the last speaker that we could accommodate. I would recall that all statements, including those that could not be delivered because of time constraints, should be uploaded. I will now call on the other stakeholders for their comments on the final documents. The first speaker on my list is Advocates for Human Rights by video.
Mr. President, the Advocates for Human Rights, the Greater Caribbean for Life, and the World Coalition Against the Death Penalty welcome Guyana's participation in the UPR as an opportunity to advance the human rights of people under sentence of death and people charged with capital crimes. We commend Guyana for supporting recommendations to adopt specific legislation to prohibit and criminalize torture. We also are pleased that Guyana supported Malaysia's recommendation to strengthen law enforcement on detention in line with the Nelson Mandela rules, including undertaking measures to improve prison conditions. We urge Guyana in implementing this recommendation to pay particular attention to the needs of women and gender diverse people in detention, aligned with the Bangkok rules. We are disappointed, however, that Guyana did not support several recommendations to ratify the OPCAT and the second optional protocol to the ICCPR, or to adopt a formal moratorium on executions and commute all existing death sentences to terms of imprisonment. Guyana also noted all recommendations to abolish the death penalty. The government asserts that the formal abolition of the death penalty will depend on constitution reform outcomes. We urge authorities in Guyana to undertake the constitutional reform process in due haste and, as part of the reform process, to collaborate with civil society, prioritizing raising the awareness of relevant stakeholders about human rights concerns regarding the death penalty and effective alternatives to the death penalty that uphold Guyana's human rights obligations. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I call on the Center for Global Non-Killing.
Dear human beings, Monsieur le Vice-Président, dear populations of the earth, including of Guyana, Excellencies everyone everywhere, dear delegation and authorities of Guyana, welcome to Geneva. Greetings of universal human rights. It is a pleasure to follow the developments of life in Guyana. Congratulations. In the quest for a perfect nation, quote from the Constitution, there is legal work to do, largely or partly on its way. Decriminalization of suicide is done. Thank you very much. Important for mental health, prevention, and medical care, this life-saving measure will improve the overall appreciation of the worth of life. Such valuation of life will positively influence the debate on death penalty, passage from a de facto abolitionist non-status to the legal abolition. Constitutional protection of the right to life also requires changing Article 138 of the Constitution, which, long story told short, favors the killer more than the victim. May constitutional change also grant greater initiative and referendum rights to the people. Finally, we congratulate Guyana for accepting, for the first time, the recommendations made to ratify the Genocide Convention. The crime of genocide is absent from the criminal code, yet in our opinion, the ratification of the Rome Statute is sufficient legal background. All it takes now is an act of government. In these times in which so many persons need to be protected from genocide, please act rapidly. Protecting against genocide is recognizing the right of everyone to an identity. Giving the right to life to everyone is giving humanity an identity. Merci, Monsieur le Vice-Président.
Merci.
Thank you. I call on the Shanxi Patriotic Volunteer Association by video.
Mr. President, I represent the International Patriotic Pact organization, which promotes patriotism without harming other nations' interests and closely follows the Universal Periodic Review. We commend Guyana for its progress in human rights. The country has achieved strong economic growth driven by its oil industry, while improving education, infrastructure, and reducing poverty and malnutrition. As a carbon-negative country, Guyana leads in climate action through forest conservation and renewable energy, offering a model for others. Guyana has strengthened legal protection for vulnerable groups, enhanced its human rights mechanisms, and promoted gender equality by tackling discrimination and violence. We encourage Guyana to continue to work to ensure equal rights for all. Finally, we invite Guyana to consider the International Patriotic Pact that we have launched and our initiative on the right to development, and to support a broader participation by countries and stakeholders. We stand ready to work together for a just, equal, and harmonious world.
Merci.
Thank you, Excellencies, distinguished colleagues. That was the last speaker on the list. Before I give the floor to the delegation of Guyana for concluding comments, allow me to note that according to the information provided, of 206 recommendations received, 146 have been accepted by Guyana and 58 noted. Additional clarifications will provide them 2 recommendations pointing to which parts were accepted and which were noted. I will now give the floor back to His Excellency for the concluding comments.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President, Excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Our thanks to members of the Troika and to colleagues, member states who would have spoken to support us. Equally, our gratitude to our sister CARICOM states who were here to support us as well. The government of Guyana attaches great importance to the United Nations and its architecture, which includes the UPR, and we endeavor to continue our collaboration with the relevant treaty bodies and mechanisms and our development partners to work on these recommendations that we have accepted. In terms of some comments that were made, allow me, Mr. Vice President, to just address a few. Currently, there are no arbitrary detentions in Guyana, no arbitrary detention of minors. Their law provides for compensation through the courts of persons who would have been detained unjustly, as determined by the court system. With respect to violence against women, a new Family Violence Act is on its way, and there is the commitment by President Irfan Ali and its new government to intensifying its program against violence against women and children. We also note the recommendation with respect to death penalty. Please be assured that since 1997, we have not executed anybody in the Cooperative Republic of Guyana. We do understand and appreciate that the recommendations come from place of interest, and we are looking forward to going through our constitutional reform process, which will be inclusive of all parties relevant to the process to address concerns, and that is something that will be on the way. I thank you, Your Excellency, members of the UPR Secretariat, interpretation, and translation for the support afforded to the Cooperative Republic of Guyana during this process. Thank you so much.
Je remercie.
I thank Her Excellency for that presentation and for Guyana's constructive participation throughout the UPR process. I now propose that the Council adopt the decision on the final document of the UPR of Guyana as shown on the screen.
Je ne vois pas de...
I see no objection. The decision is adopted.
Nous suspendons.
We shall briefly suspend the meeting before moving to consideration of the final document of Q8.
Excellences, distinguished
Excellencies, distinguished participants, we will now proceed to consideration of the outcome document of Q8 on the basis of the report of the Working Group on the Universal Periodic Review of Q8 and its addendum. These documents, as well as the information that will now be presented by the delegation of Q8, constitute the final review document and will be adopted by a standard decision of the Council. It is now my pleasure to give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Nasser Abdullah Alain, Ambassador Permanent Representative of the State of Kuwait to the United Nations Office at Geneva, to present additional information on the review. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It is my honor on behalf of the delegation of the State of Kuwait before this esteemed council. Allow me to express our sincere appreciation to the Office of the High Commissioner and the Troika, Benin, Czechia, and Thailand for their valuable efforts throughout the different stages of this mechanism, from preparation and review to the adoption of the final report. Their dedication has exemplified the spirit of cooperation and professionalism of the Council and contributed to producing a report that serves as a foundation for constructive dialogue and mutual trust among member states within the framework of the fourth UPR. Kuwait received a total of 290 recommendations. We addressed them with transparency. We fully accepted 206 for their practical and implementable nature, consistent with our national development plans. We partially accepted 4 recommendations, adopting elements compatible with our constitution and Islamic Sharia. The remaining aspects are under continuous review. For the remaining 80 recommendations, we take note of them, providing in our response the legal and constitutional reasons. This numerical and thematic distribution reflects Kuwait's consistent and constructive approach since our first review in 2010, an approach grounded in meaningful engagement with this important mechanism, which is an important platform to exchange experiences and promote best practices. It also demonstrates a careful balance between our commitment to human rights and our respect for our constitutional and legislative particularities. For the State of Kuwait, openness to recommendation enriches and strengthens our human rights experience. Kuwait relied on the work of the National Standing Committee for the preparation of reports and follow-up of human rights recommendations. It coordinates with various stakeholders and has actively engaged with civil society. This reflects our firm conviction, the importance of including diverse components of the society in this process. This is a participatory approach that contributed to a broad consensus on the most effective ways to address recommendations. A general reading of the recommendations reveals that they span the full spectrum of human rights. Underscoring the inclusiveness of this mechanism, some focus on civil and political rights, including freedom of opinion, expression, independence of the judiciary. Others emphasize economic and social rights such as education, health, housing, and employment. A significant portion addresses the rights of specific groups, including women, children, older persons, etc. In addition, several recommendations call upon Kuwait to accede to international instruments and conventions or enhance cooperation with human rights mechanisms. All this diversity reflects that these recommendations constitute a comprehensive roadmap. Mr. President, a number of recommendations focused on civil and political rights, including freedom of opinion and expression, independence of the judiciary, and a review of penalties, including death penalty. Kuwait has approached these recommendations with a commitment to harmonizing its international obligations with the provisions of its constitution. We accepted those recommendations consistent with that and partially supported those requiring a careful balance. In this context, national reforms in recent years were in line with these priorities. It's worth noting that there is an unprecedented legislative review that included 983 national laws. Kuwait undertook significant legislative changes that reflect positive engagement with the UPR recommendations. In 2025, Article 153 of the Penal Code was repealed, reinforcing the principle of gender equality and strengthening women's right to protection from any provisions that might justify violence. Minimum age of marriage was raised to 18. Article 182, which had exempted perpetrators of kidnapping from punishment if they married the victim, was also repealed. These measures are important progress. Decree Law 158 of 2024 amended the nationality law to align it with civil, economic, and social rights and to reinforce the principle of equality. The definition of torture in national legislation was amended in line with the recommendations of CAT, reflecting Kuwait's determination to converge with the highest international standards. As part of more recent developments, Decree Law number 134 of 2025 was issued on the regulation of the use and protection of the Red Crescent and Red Cross emblems. The Ministry of Interior established the Human Rights Department under the General Department of International Relations within the Office Affairs sector of the Minister of Interior. With regards to recommendations, therefore, the state of Kuwait has created a national committee for the implementation of Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security. Specialized centers were also created to protect women from violence. Kuwait, on a practical level, continued to strengthen its national system through digital transformation, including a partnership with Google and the launch of the Sahel application, which provides over 400 e-government services. We also adopted the National Environment Strategy 2035 and National Carbon Emissions Reduction Strategy 2050. Mr. President, with respect to the recommendations we took note of, most relate to issues related to the Constitution and sources of national legislation, especially the death penalty. We affirm that this penalty remains part of its legal system in accordance with the Sharia, which is a primary source of legislation. It is, however, applied only within the narrowest limits for the most serious crimes and after the exhaustion of all stages of litigation and the full guarantees of fair trial. In general, we reiterate our openness to continue dialogue and exchanging experiences. Mr. President, a wide range of recommendations addressed economic social rights as fundamental pillars of human rights. These recommendations covered education, health, housing, and work. The state of Kuwait approached them in a positive spirit, affirming that sustainable development and protection of rights are two sides of the same coin. In the field of education, we continue to provide free schooling to more than 500,000 students, including non-Kuwaitis, reflecting our commitment to equal opportunity and non-discrimination. Efforts are underway to modernize the curricula and upgrade school infrastructure. In the health sector, Kuwait has strengthened its comprehensive healthcare system through the expansion of primary health centers and specialized hospitals, as well as adopting national programs to combat chronic diseases and promote mental health. We gave special attention to preventive care and equal access to health services in line with the recommendations on the right of health to all. As for the housing sector, we continue to implement social housing to ensure that Kuwaiti families benefit from modern and integrating housing units, in addition to developing infrastructure. This reflects a commitment to provide a suitable living environment. As to labor, the state of Kuwait has strengthened its legislation in this field to promote a fair and safe working environment. We adopted programs to train and qualify youth and job seekers, enable them to integrate in the labor market, contribute to the diversification of the national economy, and supporting the goals of sustainable development. Recently, we formed a tripartite committee in the Ministry of Justice to review compensation claims for work-related injuries. This committee is responsible for examining claims and referring them to compensation committee. All these efforts reflect the state of Kuwait's commitment to promoting all human rights as an integral part of its international obligations and its national vision, New Kuwait 2035. Several segments of this society received considerable attention in the recommendations. These include promoting the rights of the child, guarantee to access of education, empowering youth, comprehensive care for the elderly, services for persons with disabilities. The state of Kuwait has approached these recommendations in a constructive and positive manner. We are convinced that care and inclusion of these groups serve as an indicator of a society's progress. In the field of childhood, we strengthened our institutional structure, establishing specialized centers and opening a direct hotline. As for the youth, we implemented national programs to support their capabilities in innovation and entrepreneurship. We established youth cultural and sports centers, all this within the vision of New Kuwait 2035. We also adopted initiatives to empower the youth in the labor market. As for the elderly, Kuwait inaugurated programs for home care and day centers that provide integrated medical and social services to ensure a dignified life. As for persons with disabilities, we allocated financial appropriations exceeding 340 million US dollars in the fiscal year 2023-24 to support their services. Over 200,000 persons benefited from them. This reflects a practical commitment to providing services for this group. We also accorded special attention to contracted labor, implementing gradual reforms to the sponsorship system, and enacted new legislation criminalizing human trafficking, including Decree Law 114. This imposes stricter penalties on residency-related trafficking offenses. This approach reflects the state's acknowledgement of relevant recommendations and affirms its commitment to ensuring fair and humane treatment for all workers. Kuwait has continued its positive engagement with the UN agencies, mandate holders, and special procedures over the last 2 years. We welcomed a number of special rapporteurs. New visits have been arranged for 2025, including Mr. Filippo Grandi, as well as the Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and the Independent Expert on Foreign Debt. Also, Kuwait is preparing to present its second national report before the Arab Charter on Human Rights in December 2025, reaffirming its belief in the complementarity of international and regional mechanisms. We have also continued our technical cooperation aimed at capacity building and enhancing competencies in the field of human rights. Kuwait, with the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, held 2 training sessions in this September, entitled Integrating a Human Rights-Based Approach in Media Coverage for Various Government Entities. The second, Human Rights and Law Enforcement for members of the Ministry of Interior. The state of Kuwait continues to hold training sessions and workshops in collaboration with ESQA, as well as the regional delegation of the ICRC. Mr. President, what we presented today through discussing the results of the UPR is a continuation of an established approach that we have set for ourselves in the fields of promoting human rights. It gives this dimension a course that is clearer and more structured in light of the constructive recommendations received. Kuwait will continue to translate recommendations into practical policies that are measurable and implementable through the Permanent National Committee and in close cooperation with state institutions and civil society. For us, the protection of human rights is a continuous path founded on review and continuous development. In conclusion, we renew our pledge to continue constructive cooperation with the Council and its mechanisms. We reaffirm our commitment to follow up on the implementation of the recommendations and to study those noted. We affirm that sincere dialogue and international cooperation remain the optimal way to achieve the shared goal of promoting human dignity and safeguarding the fundamental rights and freedoms of all. I thank you, sir.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much, Excellency. I now will give the floor to member states and observer states for their comments on the final document and the review. The speaking time is 1 minute 30 seconds for all states. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Maldives.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. The Maldives warmly welcomes the distinguished delegation from Kuwait to the adoption of the UPR report and compliments Kuwait's commitment to the UPR process. We commend the government of Kuwait for accepting majority of the recommendations, including the 3 recommendations made by the Maldives during the UPR working group session in May. We wish the government of Kuwait success in the implementation of the accepted recommendations and request the Council to adopt the UPR outcome report of Kuwait by consensus. Thank you, Mr. President.
Merci.
Thank you. I give the floor to the delegation of Mali.
Monsieur le Vice-président.
Vice President, I should like to extend a warm welcome to the delegation of Kuwait. My delegation commends Kuwait on having accepted a significant number of recommendations in the UPR, including expanding the protection system planned by labour law to domestic workers and by strengthening shared management of education involving the teaching body, parents and community members to all levels of the planning process of the sector. Mali wishes Kuwait every success in implementing the recommendations accepted and calls on the Council to adopt the report. Thank you.
Merci. Le Maroc.
Thank you. Morocco has the
سيد الرئيس ترحب المملكة المغربية بالتزام.
Thank you, Vice President. We commend Kuwait on its commitment to the recommendations received during the UPR. We are pleased to see Kuwait has accepted Morocco's recommendations, calling upon it to pursue implementation of national development programs in line with the SDGs, while ensuring that it reconciles sustainable development and promotion of human rights in all sectors, empowerment of women, and ensuring parity in all spheres, while focusing on the appointment of women in leadership posts and further protecting children from all forms of violence. In conclusion, we support the adoption of the report of Kuwait and we wish them every success in the implementation of the recommendations. Thank you. Thank you. Nepal, please.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Nepal warmly welcomes the delegation of Kuwait to the adoption of UPR outcome and thanks them for their constructive engagements with the human rights mechanisms. We thank Kuwait for accepting all 3 recommendations that we offered. We appreciate Kuwait for the reform measures taken towards strengthening the effective protection and promotion of rights of migrant workers. Nepal wishes Kuwait all success in implementing the accepted recommendations and supports the adoption of the UPR outcome report by consensus. I thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Merci.
Thank you. Oman has the floor.
شكرا السيد نائب الرئيس.
Thank you, Vice President. We are delighted to welcome the delegation of the brother state of Kuwait. We commend them on the cooperation between Kuwait and human rights mechanisms and the progress achieved at the legislative and executive levels to promote justice and human dignity. We have taken note of the UPR results of the brother state of Kuwait, which took place in a climate of constructive dialogue and fruitful interaction. We thank Kuwait for having accepted our recommendations, calling upon it to pursue efforts in assisting in areas affected by conflict and to further invest in digital infrastructure to modernize the education sector. We recommend the adoption of the report and wish Kuwait every success in the implementation of the recommendations accepted.
Merci, le Pakistan.
Thank you. Pakistan has the floor.
President, we warmly welcome the Kuwaiti delegation for presenting a follow-up on the recommendations received during its 4th UPR. We commend Kuwait for its constructive engagement in accepting majority of the recommendations, including those made by Pakistan. Our delegation appreciates the progress made by Kuwait on multiple dimensions of human rights and welcome its efforts to promote and protect them. Pakistan wishes the state of Kuwait every success in the implementation of accepted recommendations and requests the Council to adopt the UPR outcome report with consensus. I thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Merci.
Thank you. Kato has the floor.
شكرا السيد نائب الرئيس.
Thank you very much, Vice President. We welcome the delegation of Kuwait and we hail the head of delegation and thank him for the additional clarifications that he has provided, reflecting the commitment to the UPR of Kuwait and its cooperation with human rights mechanisms. We welcome the adoption in Kuwait of various measures to promote human rights and to honor international commitments in this area, as well as the acceptance of our recommendations. We recommended to the government that it implement UPR recommendations as part of its national priorities and international commitments. In conclusion, we wish the state of Kuwait every success in implementing the recommendations, and we recommend to the Council that it adopt the report. Thank you. Thank you. The Russian Federation.
Vice President, Russia welcomes Kuwait's fourth cycle of the UPR. We thank the delegation for providing information on the recommendations made, of which most are adopted, including the Russian ones. Kuwait has made significant progress in human rights, particularly with improvement of the national legislation on human rights and freedoms. We wish Kuwait every success in continuing these improvements. We also note the interest of Kuwait in international cooperation on promotion and protection of human rights and the human rights mechanisms of the United Nations, as well as its constructive interaction with other international and regional organizations, particularly in supporting humanitarian projects and development projects for countries in conflict and suffering emergencies. Russia recommends adopting the report on Kuwait's fourth UPR. Thank you.
Merci, l'Arabie Saoudite.
Thank you. Saudi Arabia, please.
شكرا سيد نائب الرئيس.
Thank you, Vice President. I am pleased to be able to thank the head of the Kuwaiti delegation for the presentation, which shed a great deal of light on Kuwait's commitment to human rights and which also set out the position of the country clearly on the recommendations listed in the report. We listened with interest to the comments of Kuwait, which are testimony to the country's commitment to cooperating with human rights mechanisms and its respectful approach of international norms in this area. We welcome the progress achieved in Kuwait in the area of human rights, reflecting its constant commitment to promote and protect human rights at all levels. In conclusion, we wish the brother state of Kuwait further progress and prosperity, and we recommend that the Council adopt the report of the UPR Working Group. Thank you.
Merci, le Sénégal.
Thank you. Senegal, please.
Merci, Monsieur le
Thank you, Vice President. Senegal welcomes the delegation of Kuwait warmly and thanks it for the information, updated information that it has provided to the Council. My delegation notes with satisfaction the progress made by the government of Kuwait in implementing its commitments to ensure protection and promotion of human rights. To that effect, Senegal hails the establishment in 2023 of a national committee for the protection against domestic violence, as well as steps undertaken to bolster protection of women and children. Lastly, while calling for the adoption of the report, Senegal would reiterate to the delegation of Kuwait its wishes for full success in implementing the accepted recommendations. Thank you.
Merci, le Sierra Leone.
Thank Thank you. Sierra Leone, please.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Sierra Leone welcomes the distinguished Kuwaiti delegation to the adoption of the fourth Universal Periodic Review Report and thanks them for their continued commitment to the UPR process and other human rights mechanisms that protect and promote human rights. We commend Kuwait for accepting the majority of the recommendations it's received during the review, reflecting its strong commitment to addressing critical human rights challenges. We are also encouraged by Kuwait's acceptance of the two recommendations made by Sierra Leone, the complete abolition of all elements of the kafala system to ensure comprehensive labor protection and freedom of movement for migrant workers in accordance with international human rights standards, and the continued strengthening of women's rights and their participation in all aspects of society. Mr. Vice President, Sierra Leone fully supports the adoption of the report and wishes Kuwait every success in implementing the accepted recommendations. I thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. Singapore has the floor.
Mr. Vice President, Singapore congratulates the delegation of the State of Kuwait, a fellow small state, on its fourth Universal Periodic Review. We commend Kuwait for its constructive engagement with the UPR process and its careful consideration of the various recommendations put forward by delegations. We thank Kuwait for accepting both our recommendations. First, to continue to implement programs to promote and protect women's rights and encourage women's representation in leadership positions. And second, to continue its efforts to introduce and implement policies to empower persons with disabilities, including to facilitate their inclusion in social life. Singapore fully supports the adoption of the Working Group's report on Kuwait's UPR. I thank you.
Merci. Excellent.
Thank you, Excellencies, distinguished participants. That was the last speaker that we could accommodate during this meeting, and that brings us to the end of this meeting. We will meet again this afternoon at 3 p.m. to continue the consideration and adoption of the final document on Q8 with the spillover list and the NGO list, as well as the other states examined during the 49th session. And then we'll start the general debate on item 6 of the agenda. I thank the ambassador of Kuwait and the delegation for their flexibility and their agreement to return at 3 p.m. to finalize the adoption process for the outcome document on Kuwait. And with that, I close the 31st meeting of the 60th session of the Human Rights Council.